Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. And I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm Kristen Johnson.
And we hope you guys are having a great time out there, a great weekend. For our U.S. listeners, we'd like to hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. Hopefully you ate a lot of that turkey larky. I see Greg Koss and Carol Garcia out there. Hey, guys, how you doing?
I
hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. Again, for our U.S. listeners. I hope we sound okay to you. I had to kind of reset this board, and I had to fiddle with the knobs. And that hopefully the volume sounds all right. Let us know in the chat if it doesn't. If it's too quiet or too loud. Just send us a message, please. But yeah, getting back to that holiday, it is that time of year, and I know a lot of people don't really look forward to the holidays. And if you know anybody, U.S. listeners, this is for, again, in the U.S., we have something called 988 as a suicide and crisis lifeline, as a national support of local crisis centers that provide free and confidential emotional support to people in a crisis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the United States. All you have to do is dial 988. I know we implemented this at my work recently, and it's become a thing. So it's like 911. We have a 988, and just to put that out there because it's not the greatest time for everyone. But,
no.
It is good, and hopefully, yours was good, and you got lots of that turkey. I know what I wanted to talk about a little bit real quick before we get into our guest's bio, is some of the movies we've been watching.
Oh, God.
I got to say, I don't know if any of you guys, and obviously we're not getting paid by them, right. But if you got Hulu, they got some really cool movies. And anybody have Hulu out there? What did we like on there? What were we watching last night? We watched like 3 movies.
Okay.
So Gaia
was one of them.
Gaia,
and that goes right down our alley when we speak about the mycelium underneath the earth and how the trees talk and being the oldest organism on earth. And everything. Yeah,
very strange thing. And something we want to talk a little bit more about is like the mushrooms and the jellyfish that have a DNA that's considered alien by science. And mushrooms, like, they really do seem not of this earth in a way. Yeah, they're quite intelligent. And Gaia, this movie, goes into that a little bit. And it kind of goes into cryptids and sort of a hybrid of that. And some of those mushrooms seemed a little kind of fun to kind of catch the spores.
Oh, yeah, you have to watch the movie.
Pretty colors.
Pretty colors.
And We Need to Do Something was the other movie we watched. We really liked last night.
God, it was wicked good. It was funny as heck.
Really cool. Dark humor movie.
Yeah. And
well done. Really good plot to that. But anyways. I see. Hey, Sherry, how you doing?
Hi, Sherry.
How's it going?
Not like related or anything.
Yeah, good to see you out here. Another car.
Yes.
Let's talk about our guest. His name is Andy Mercer. This is his pen name. He goes by Andy. He is a writer, researcher, and professional psychotherapist with over 30 years' experience investigating both the esoteric and the paranormal, primarily from a phenomenological perspective. I love that word.
You said it too. Good.
I do. The British know what they're talking about, right? I think Steve Mera talks about that too as well.
Phenomenology,
right? Rather than having one phenomena or another, we can kind of put them together, meaning be it UFO, UAP phenomena or paranormal phenomena. He experiences this from a lived experience free of supposition. Outside his professional publications in the field of psychotherapy, his occult works include The Wicked Shall Decay, Underground Gnosis, Occult Currents, and Dante's Inferno for Three Hands Press, Liber, Coronazom, And I practiced that before the show. Good
Yes.
job, Chris.
Good.
All right, pat myself on the back. Which is coming out next year. We're going to talk a lot about that, as well as Runin, the Wisdom of the Runes, on Aeon Sophia Press. Plus articles and introductions for occult anthologies published by Three Hands Press, Aeon Sophia Press, and Anathema Publishing. Andy, you're making me work here. I'm going to just bring you on. Let's see how you're doing.
Hello.
Good evening. Good morning, sir. I know you're in the UK.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's great to have you on our show. Again, we had you on not too long ago. One of our kind of paranormal panel things that came together. We do appreciate you joining us for that. But tonight we're going to talk about your works. And we're very excited about this because your book seems so interesting.
Excellent. Hopefully, I'm hearing some feedback. Are you okay?
I was hearing a little bit of feedback when you first came on there. But it seems like it's dying down. If you have your speakers on at all, you may want to turn them down. Or if you have earbuds, that tends to...
I'm running on speakers. I might have to quickly grab some headphones and put the sounds of it.
Oh, you can do that.
Okay.
No worries.
It's fine.
1, 2, 3. Is that okay now? Seems
Yeah.
to have disappeared. Oh, it's disappeared. Even better.
If the speakers come through the mic of the computer, that'll cause that feedback that you're hearing. So, anyways, it is wonderful to have you on our show.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of people out here saying hello.
Oh, yes.
Carol, Anne-Marie Young.
Yes. Yeah.
I think Anne-Marie might have been in that panel that we had.
I think so too.
Yes, I think I joined that. Rather sort of dropped in out of nowhere, didn't I? Could have just joined in all of a sudden. But yes, I think she was there as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we first met through Paranormal UK Radio Network, at which you host their flagship show now, the Paranormal UK Radio. It's a great podcast, and you can catch our Bigfoot and the Bunny episodes out there. Plug. But we definitely want you guys to get out there and check out Andy's work on there, as well as all the other hosts who put a great deal of energy and time into those.
Well, I've kind of been floating around on various shows over the years since we first started the network. I'm the kind of the third sort of face, if you like, of the PAUK network. Whereas Irene and Mark are the main people know about, and I was sort of involved from the beginning as well. Just mainly sat back, and I used to edit and produce some of the shows on the network, but didn't have one of my own. I did have one briefly for a little while, but I got bored doing it. I much prefer doing the background stuff at that point. I then got involved with Steve Ward's High Strangeness Factor. I helped him set that one up for us again about 3 or 4 years ago, and became a sort of semi-occasional co-host on there. And Mark and Irene, of course, have always done the main show since the beginning, but they both decided they want to take a bit of a break. Mark's now got his own show, which goes out on Astral Perceptions, and Irene is doing a bit more background sort of work. We're looking at ways to expand the network, and she just wanted some time off. I mean, they did a show for 2 hours every week for years, so they needed a bit of a break. So they kind of, initially it was going to be myself and Irene for a while doing it, and Irene said, look, do you mind if I drop out for a while? Whilst another show that's on the network, the Paranormal Concept Show, which is 3 people do that one over in the UK here. Kerry was one of the 3 of them, and they'd kind of run out to do a bit themselves as well, so they decided to sort of step back a bit. So Kerry was left sort of free as well. So the 2 of us have now kind of taken over the PAUK show for the time being, certainly for the next sort of few months at least. So yes, I'm now much more visible and audible, if you like. Because we tend to do just audio shows. It's quite an experience me being actually on screen and seeing myself on screen as well.
Oh, that's another dimension, it's cool. We try to hit as many markets as we can and that kind of thing. So we love being part of the Paranormal UK radio family.
Excellent.
Me too.
Very good quality shows, and we're pleased to be part of it. So I'm glad.
The other bit I just want to mention is I do the YouTube channel. We do have a YouTube channel as well, which most people don't seem to know. It sort of lurks around there. I always upload all the shows, on most of the shows, so 1 or 2 I don't, on there, usually a week or 2 after the show goes up on the network. So it's always on the network first, and a little while later on, it gets put up. So you guys are always on there as well. So at the moment, I'm literally adding almost every day, every other day, certainly, but almost every day. So it's a lot of stuff on there. Most of the last few years worth are on there as well. So
excellent.
tends to not get mentioned, so I wanted to plug it a little bit.
That's right. And yeah, I know you do the covers for that YouTube channel and whatnot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mark had told me that. So that's really cool. And I'm glad, if that's the way you want to get into podcasting, check out YouTube. I think that's wonderful. You can just throw the channel on, let it go. It's a nice thing to go to sleep to. You don't have to pay too much attention because it's, you're listening to audio. And that's a good way to get started in podcast listening.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not used to that medium. Phenomenology. I love this term.
We love this term.
For our audience, can you tell us a little bit what you mean by that?
Please.
Well, yes, certainly can do. I have a degree in philosophy, and one of my main focuses was what's called mind and consciousness, the way in which the mind works and we perceive things around us. And the phenomenological approach philosophically is to look at what you're actually experiencing, what's going on around you, and what you can determine from the experience, rather than coming from it what you'd call more the empirical approach, where you have a set of ideas already, which you then look to verify your ideas. So it kind of turns it on its head. So rather than going over a certain set of beliefs or looking for verification or otherwise of the beliefs, the approach is to have no set ideas at all, and let's see what you can conclude from the phenomenon you experience. Now, we've all got very strong ideas about what ghosts are, what UFOs are, and those kind of things. They're almost like in little boxes of what we think they are. And the phenomenological approach is to try to break out of those completely and see where it takes you. Now, for me, I've found, without getting all the details now, I'm starting to really believe that there's an underlying uniformity to all of these experiences. They're all this experience of high strangeness, but there's no set division anymore. For me, it's all kind of otherness that we're experiencing that all kinds of connects together. And so that's why I take that approach in the field of paranormal research, but say because it's a philosophical approach, which I was very good at university. Got very good marks for my research papers on phenomenological approach. It's based around Martin Heidegger and Edmund Husserl's phenomenological philosophy, which is the idea, again, of looking to the things themselves. What do these phenomena tell us, rather than worry about any beliefs that we might already have about them, and work from that approach. So that's how I tend to work. I would just want to say one thing very quickly. If my voice goes a bit funny, I look like I'm doing something like this. I had a very large tooth removed a couple of days ago, and it's still giving me some jip. And you start to talk like that when you're tooth removed.
Yes,
Yeah,
we understand that.
I do apologise if my voice goes a bit weird.
Thank you.
But yes, I tried to look at all these things, including the occult as well, from that perspective. What am I experiencing? What am I learning from what I'm doing? So, yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful.
That's excellent. I love the term, because the phenomena is all seemingly related. If there's one thing we learn from doing all these shows and talking to everybody, is like how many similarities there are between our guests, whether they're people that have experienced paranormal phenomena, cryptids, ufology experts, or abductees. It's all related. Near-death experiencers. We see a lot of parallels in the phenomena. Yeah, except one we'll call, the orbs are bad. They're absolutely all dust. And the other one is like, well, they've been following me around since I was, 2. So, yeah, it's very interesting stuff. And I like a more encompassing term like that. Tell us about your books.
Blimey, where do I begin? Oh, good Lord. The first one that was published, I actually wrote 2 books back in the early 2000s, very early 2000s. First one was Liber Coronzom, by the way, the exact pronunciation. It's
Thank you.
Where do I begin? It's my experiences of working with what's called Enochian magic from Dr. John Dee from the 1500s, late 1500s. His experiences, shall we say, are quite phenomenal. He was very much interested in knowing as much as he could about how the world worked, scientifically, mathematically, astrologically, as well as astronomically. It was all that kind of learning was very much in his ballpark. He'd reached a point where he felt he'd learned all he could about the world through science and mathematics and philosophy and all other researches, but wanted to know more. And to cut a long story short, the idea was to try and talk to angels directly, to learn what he could from them. And with a guy called Edward Kelly, they worked together to create a system of communication, which became known as the Enochian communication. The term Enoch itself is actually a term that was added later on. It wasn't Dee's own, but what Dee hoped he was going to uncover was the missing book of Enoch. and believed these angels were from that source. So it was given that name afterwards, but for him it was angelic communications. Now, the system itself, or the material, was written in the late 1500s and was kept really sort of lost really in time. It was held at the British Museum and other places. The Ashmolean had some of it as well in Oxford, but it was kind of sort of left behind and sort of lost in time. It was sort of rediscovered, if you like, in the 1800s by a group called the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn. Now, they were a group of magicians that became quite famous, and people like Aleister Crowley and Rebecca Mathers were members, and they worked with Enochian from the information they got basically from the British Museum where these original diaries are being stored. Now, they created their own system based on his system, Dee's system, but it was a lot of fairly substantial changes were made to the system. And what I wanted to do was get back to Dee's own original source material, which is his own handwritten diaries, which I say were held in the British Museum and the Ashmolean and other places. And you can, thankfully, somebody actually put them all up online, perfectly legally. It was perfectly fine. He'd paid for the photographs to be taken, and the PDFs were put online. So he was able, for the first time ever, the average Joe, if you like, could access them directly. And reading through them wasn't easy because it's 16th century handwriting, sometimes not very clear, but you could see the original system, how it actually worked, as opposed to what the Golden Dawn had done. It made quite a lot of changes. Now, when I wrote the book back in about 2000, there weren't many other books around that had done what I've done. Since then, there have been quite a number of books that have come out that try to take Enochian back to its original form, i.e. without the Golden Dawn influence, to build a system, if you like, of communication. Now, my Liber Coronzon was basically about my experiences working with some elements of the system. The term Coronzon in itself, the actual name was significant because the name, it's an important name within the Enochian system because it's an energy entity, whatever you want to call it, that you encounter fairly early on. But it's been misspelt from the beginning, or from published material. It's actually spelt slightly differently, and part of the reason I did the book was to show this is the correct spelling. A lot's made about how certain names and terms are spelled in the occult world because they have geometric significance, number significance, but it was clear that the changes had been made. And part of what I was trying to do was take it back to his original source material and correct those sorts of changes. That sounds a bit arrogant, but I wanted to make sure it was as pure to what Dee had actually worked to begin with. Now, that was the first book, which came out in 2016. I've since written a second edition, which is coming out next year with Three Hands Press, which is something we briefly mentioned at the beginning. It's had quite a few alterations made, and there's a lot of new material I've added to it, because, as I say, I actually wrote it in 2000, 2001, so 20-odd years ago. So there's quite a few things I've changed in terms of the approach and added to. So that one's coming out next year. The second book I had published was Runen, the original one, which is on the runes, obviously, if you can tell from the name. Again, that was written around about the same sort of time, around about 2015. Oh, there we are. Yes. That's the second edition, which came out with Troy Books last year, 2 years ago. That, again, has had a lot of new material added to it. Some corrections have been made that needed doing. It's the first English language book that focused on just the one particular version of the runes, the Armadan runes, which was highlighted there. They are a very specific set of runes that are not as historic as the normal runes like the Anglo-Saxon and the Germanic, the ones we tend to know.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but let's break this down. Before we leave the Enochian magic, I find Enochian stuff fascinating. I find angels fascinating. We've talked a lot about angels. People often talk about demons. They throw that D word around. But angels are just as fascinating and seem to be the same kind of non-human entity, if you will.
Yeah. That was the significant thing. When you work with, and I say work with, what I do is what's called scrying, where you're trying to connect and communicate with these entities and beings. They are neither angels nor demons. They're something else. They're something quite different. There is a set of pronouncements that are in these diary notes of what they say they are, and they're not Christian at all. They're not Jewish. They're nothing like that. They say things that don't quite work. I mean, one of the probably most controversial at the time was that they said Adam and Eve were not of God. They were humans, which you imagine quite some significant thing to be saying in the 1500s, certainly. So there's things like that in there that are quite different to what would be the thinking of the time. There's always been speculation whether it was Edward Kelly. Well, basically what happened was Dee himself wasn't psychic at all. He had no ability. He tried a couple of scryers, people looking in the crystal ball for him. And the first one wasn't particularly good. And then the second one from the diary, it seems to come out of the blue from nowhere, but from other research suggests he heard that John Dee, this rather wealthy man, was looking for a scryer, and Edward Talbot, as he was called the first time, approached Dee and said, I could probably help you here. A bit later on, Talbot suddenly becomes Edward Kelly, just changes out of the blue for no obvious reason. He may have been trying to hide his past, perhaps. But this is when the communication starts to begin, where he's looking into the crystal ball, describing what he's seeing to Dee, and Dee writes it all down. Now, as far as we could tell, Kelly didn't know an awful lot about this sort of stuff, other than more kind of general sort of looking at crystal balls. And the amount of information and the speed of the information over the short period of time that came out, it would just be impossible to have made up. It was too coherent, it worked, it connected. One of the things that came out was a whole new language, which was claimed by the angels to be ancient and early language, the language of Adam and Eve. Now, there's no real evidence of it existing prior to these. Some of the old Semitic languages of the Middle East look a little similar, but there's nothing that's can be directly connected to it. But the language works. It's structured. It's got its own syntax. It actually makes sense. And one of the other things that came out was a series of what are called the Enochian calls, which are ways in which you can communicate with these angelic beings. But it was dictated backwards, one letter at a time. So he wrote it down by a series of grids, give the grid reference, that letter, that letter, that letter, backwards one at a time. When you reverse and transcribe it into English, it's proper sentences. Now, there's no way you can make that up.
Right.
On your own, you just couldn't have done it. It's come from somewhere. And that's the most fascinating part of it.
Yeah.
Now, I use the calls in my book, Liber Chronzom, to explore the realms, the beings, the creatures, whatever you want to call them. I've been experimenting with this stuff since, the 1980s, really. But one of the things I did discover when I first got to university in London was they had computers with the internet. It was all very new back in the sort of late 90s. In the late 90s, there was a chance to communicate with other people who worked with this stuff. And I was finding there was a guy, actually, he was one Scandinavian country, I think it might be Finland or Norway, but he'd done a lot of his own experiments and scrying experiences. And what he wrote down and described were remarkably similar to what I'd experienced. And I was really quite taken aback by that, because I thought, this is not just my imagination. There's too much of this. It's too similar. Now, interestingly, I mentioned Aleister Crowley earlier on. He experimented with Enochian and tried the cause and wrote a book called The Vision and the Voice, which describes his experiences, but they're very different to other people I've known who've worked with this stuff. And I think sometimes with that, you get your own personality starts to affect how you experience these things. So he was having quite unpleasant experiences. The Choronzon that came through to him was some big monstrous demon. My experience of connecting with it was a very tall, white, angelic figure, literally stone white, and with wings, and you couldn't see the face because the eyes were so bright. So that was my experience. It was quite different, but more like what this guy in Scandinavia had experienced. And I thought, that is really interesting. There's a definite uniformity here of experience.
Which, when you say tall white, I immediately think of the alien version, right? The alien race that is supposed to supposedly, working with earthlings, humans, to protect the planet.
By tall, I'd say gigantic. We're talking huge, 50 foot plus, maybe. Something like that. It was just enormous.
I'm talking about something more like a Cthulhu here.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, don't. There's one of those myths that goes around that John Dee had the Necronomicon. There's a John Dee translation of Necronomicon. Pure fantasy. It doesn't exist at all. But it's often when I've been asked about that, about the John Dee's version of the Necronomicon, where did he get it from? Is it any good? No, it's completely fake.
Now, when you talk about John Dee and those rituals, they really got into the esoteric. Now, I mean, they really were, even for, people who are into magic and practice Solomonic sorcery, if I'm not mistaken, they really pushed some boundaries. Is that right?
Well, it's seen as one of the most direct forms of access, shall we say. Also, the fact that you don't really know. So you kind of don't know what you're dealing with. It doesn't fit the usual classifications. You've got lists of the demons that have been published in the Middle Ages and onwards. So you get a fairly good idea of what you're working with if you work with that kind of stuff. This is much more mysterious, shall we say. More the creatures and beings, whatever you want to call them, that Dee was working with, the names have never been seen before. Some of the early ones were the usual Raphael, Michael, angels. But then the others that came through later, unknown. Names never been seen before. Well, unknown. Many of them are unpronounceable. They're often like lots of consonants, so you kind of pronounce them. but there do seem to be something there. Now, what it is you're really communicating with, working with, you could argue that it is aliens from another dimension or something along those lines. It's possible. Really don't know. But certainly what I found was the most amazing was the visions themselves. What you're seeing is incredibly real. It's not like you're just daydreaming and vaguely imagining sort of misty buildings. You're walking through landscapes. You're passing beings, and they're sort of almost looking at you as if they can see you're there. You know, it's really hard to explain unless you really experience it. It feels very real, but it's the fact that people have the same experiences. That's what I find, or very similar experiences. They tend to, I feel they're coloured a bit by your own expectations, as so many of these things are. But if you try to be as objective, I suppose one put it, or phenomenological, if you like, in terms of what you are seeing and experiencing, it's amazing. It's not frightening. It could be if you wanted it to be.
Now, when we talk about phenomena, and a lot of our listeners come from paranormal backgrounds, what sort of phenomena did you experience practicing this art of the occult, this magic, that they could relate to in a way that they might experience out in the field?
It's a difficult one because a lot of us occultists are quite cagey about what we do and what we experience. So it's a difficult one to answer clearly, shall we say. Other than what I have experienced in the past feels very real. I've seen some real world experiences that I can only attribute to what I've been working on. I'll tell you a story. I'll give you a little example. I might sound mean doing this, but there was a time when we had here, where I live, 3 neighbours, either side and across the road. All 3 of them, pain in the backside. I'll be honest with you, the young couple one side were fine until she gave birth, and her mother was a pain in the arse. She kept parking across our drive, literally in the way. It was quite rude. Often I'd ask her to, and I'm a psychotherapist, I have clients come and visit my office, which is this place here, and I'd say, look, can you please not park there? I've got clients coming. She'd move the car, but it's like almost every time she'd do it. I think, what's wrong with you? What do I have to keep asking you?
Right. Yeah.
Meantime, the other side, the guy had retired. He had a building company and was doing DIY in his house almost every day, banging and drilling, sawing. It was really quite annoying. You know, again, I'd ask him, can you perhaps keep down a bit? He used to say to me, this is the daft thing. I work from home. My office is here during the week. He said, I try and do it during the week so I don't disturb people at the weekend. But I'm working the week. It's like, I think, this is ridiculous. It's getting silly. And then myself and the young lady next door had the problem with the guy opposite who had a Harley Davidson motorbike. Come home from work, take the bike out the garage, engine on, revving it, leave it running for 5-6 minutes, and then go off on a ride. Early evening. Of course, the baby wakes up every time because of the noise. I'm sitting here having to close my windows in the summer because of the noise. So for different reasons, they were a little bit irritating, I have to say. And I thought, right, let's see, what can I do to change things? I did some ritual work, magical work, and within 6 months, all 3 of them have moved out. All 3 of them. Wow. Guy next door had a second baby. The house wasn't big enough. It was only 2 bedrooms, so they moved out. Guy across the road, for whatever reason, started moved out. The guy on the other side moved to Romania to a house he'd bought there to live there. He thought he'd had enough. It was within probably less than 6 months. All 3 of them left. Now, you could say pure coincidence, but I did stuff.
It's a synchronicity.
That's right.
And what you did as well.
We're not a big fan of coincidences.
Yes. I mean, it does fit Jung's definition of synchronicity. You're thinking something and it happens in the world. That's the specific definition he was talked about. It's the mirroring of your thinking and what happens to reality around you. But yeah, nothing bad happened to anyone. I have no idea. But the either side, we still stay friends with the young couple. We send Christmas cards still. We go on fine with them. It was just her mother. And she said herself, I'm a pain in the arse. So she knew it. You know, the other guy still went to Romania and I don't know what happened to him after that, but to say, after putting up with this a good couple of years, this was going on, it was getting ridiculous. I thought, I'm going to try this. I know how to do it properly. I know how to not heavily come back against myself. I know how to, I've been doing this stuff since the 1980s, so I knew what I was doing. That's probably the single biggest I'm prepared to talk about that actually I can say had a magical effect. It worked, you know. It's one of those things that if I ever think this is nonsense I'm making up, you go through these ideas and you think, this is rubbish, this isn't real. I think, remember what happened to those 3? That's just too much of a one coincidence. 2, 3. I know. They just don't know. And what I've noticed, and I've said this before other times, the correlation between magical exercises and the results occurring are not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination, but they're too often to be coincidence. There's too many times for it to work to be coincidental, not enough to be say you can make it happen no matter what. The correlation is too high. Is the best way I can put it.
I think you're right. I guess what I was getting at is you feel like a lot of it is psychological, not that it's in our heads, but it is in our head in a way.
Yes.
Changing people's emotional states or things of that nature, or do you see actual physical effects? I think from working with a lot of spirits, like Kristen and I have seen physical effects of things too. Manifestations, and whether it be like an apparition or things moving in the house
or hearing
or
things,
certainly measuring the voices and stuff like that, or having like spikes of electricity, EMF, whatever it might be.
We like to go into experiments,
man-made or human,
and measure.
Measure those things. If you see some of that with your practice as well.
Well, one of the things I often do, used to be involved in a paranormal events company for the public to come along to, and if the place was a bit on the quiet side, I do a little ritual work, and it would change. The atmosphere would change, and it seemed to make a difference. It caused things to begin to occur. So that was one little trick I used to use, if you like, to try and boost the place up. But yeah, you do find that, as I say, when you're not... It's hard to explain it really. Sometimes it's almost if you just sort of go it kind of casually almost. I'll do what I need to do. I'll do it properly, do it the way it's supposed to be done, and let's see the results work. One of the things I did with Enochian stuff is it's quite a long process to communicate with Enochian entities. You have to go through a lot of ritual work. I pared it down over the years to essential core, and it still seemed to work. So I almost think it's like you have to be tested at first when you begin to experiment, to do the whole kit and caboodle, to show your dedication. And once you've shown that, the sense is almost like, okay, well, you obviously do want to get in contact with us. You are prepared. Then you can scale it down a bit and it still be work. Still be effective. So I find you can experiment. Now, one of the books I'm actually working on at the moment, it's a little way off it for being ready, but that is, again, my early experiences of paring things down, if you like, my own approach. For many years, I live in a quite large town, but there was nobody I knew at all interested in this sort of the occult stuff, the ritual stuff. And I was working very much solo, just the books I was able to buy and put together my own kind of system of workings. And someone said to me a while ago, you should write this down, put it together and publish it. So that's one of the things I'm working on for some point in the future, almost like a beginner's guide, but not. It's like a beginner's, but if you really want to get into it more, here's what you can do.
Right. I think that's cool, and it's well put. I think a lot of the people's turnoff to say magic and sorcery is sometimes how involved high magic or ritual magic can be. And Crowley would talk about rituals that could take, you couldn't just do it in an afternoon. It would be weeks of work and preparation.
To have Abramellion, which takes a year and a half to do. If you finish it, that's a hell of a long time.
That's like, just crazy talk to a lot of people, like to put that kind of dedication in. But you have to wonder from the other side, like you said, like they want you to do the whole kit and caboodle. Well put. If there's a certain, devotional level that's required to be a devotee of a deity or any kind of non-human entity, that you almost have to prove yourself till you can get to that kind of abbreviated, I can just think about it now when we have that connection. It's well honed. And you're tuned into whatever frequency that might be, right? There seems to be some sort of frequency involved in those kind of communications.
It's like you want to communicate. They become more comfortable if you wanted to communicate with them. And I'm always going to say, I don't know what they are. I'm never going to say they're angels, they're demons, they're classic. I think we again, one of the things I often talk about is the fact that these entities are much like ghosts, UFOs, whatever. They appear how you want them to appear, what you understand, or what your belief system is, or what your experience is. They will conform to that. Because I've worked with different systems of magic that aren't connected really at all, and yet they both seem to work, shall we say. Working with the runic stuff and the Enochian stuff are worlds apart. There's no connection at all, yet they both appear to have validity. They seem to work. You connect with something. You work with something. And that I find fascinating. To me, there's like an underlining current of the energies appear as they want to appear to you.
That's right.
It's what you believe.
Right. They may pull it from us to even make their appearance happen, right? We've seen this in abductee phenomena. And abductees have said things like, the alien, the lack of it's a label, I know, said to me, I'm appearing as a gray because this is how you would perceive me.
Exactly.
Taking it right from you. And, we do think there are a lot of correlations between that and the other labels like deity and non-human entity. Philip White has a great comment there. He says it's like ITC work. They have get to know your energy and spirit, and trust you and your intentions, I believe. I think that's a very valid point.
And get to the runes. We will put up your rune question as well. I don't want to think we forgot about you.
Absolutely. Some questions out there about the runes. So we can move on to that. Let's bring that back. Runa is the name of that book. Very interesting name. And this is not your typical runes, right?
No.
Most people are familiar with 2 alphabets, I think, within the runes. I don't know a lot about them. Please fill in our listeners out.
Please.
Well, certainly. Well, put it this way, the runes themselves, there are different versions that exist, or that we know of. The Germanic, the oldest versions. You have the Anglo-Saxon, which can vary from like 26 to 33 runes, and then you have the younger Futhark. They're called Futharks, etc. Those are the 3 that people know well. They're ones you see around. You can buy their sets and that sort of thing. They're thought as being the 3 real, official, historic sets of runes. And what I've just said is complete nonsense. There are far more than that. There's about 20 different versions. Even the Germanic, the ones we know, the 24 runes that we know well, there are variations of those, different numbering, different orderings that have been recorded in history. So the Anglo-Saxons, there are dozens of versions of those. You go around the country, particularly the UK ones, but you can find variants all over the place. The Scandinavian ones are 16, a little bit more settled, but the idea that there's just these 3 and that's it, and everything else is real is ridiculous. But often it's talked about that way. I mean, Ralph Bloom, for his sins, really brought runes back in the 1950s, his book, but he had 25. There was a blank rune. There's no such thing as a blank rune. There never was. It's a complete invention, yet it's fully accepted as being a genuine rune. The truth is that he had the plastic tiles you used to get with his set. It was cheaper to produce 25 than 24. And rather than just have a spare one, or say use it because if you lose one, you can use this one. He kept this weird rune, the rune of weird, W-Y-R-D. The weird runs through all the runes. That's not one specific rune for that. And it's just crazy, but that's what happens to the runes. But there is one particular set of Futhark called the Armanen, which are specifically, basically, they were created in 1909 by a guy called Guido von List. He was a runic mystic in Germany just after the turn of the century, last century. And he had a cataract operation, and during his period of convalescence with the cataracts, he was blind for about 18 months. He had visions of these 18 runes that came from a poem called the Havamal, which is a Scandinavian, it's Icelandic actually, poem from about the 1400s, or recorded in the 1400s. It's probably older than that. And it lists these 18 rune songs. Now, there's never been a specific set of runes connected to those. And he envisioned this set of 8, that these were actual 18 runes being described, and drew them, shall we say, formed the runes himself. Now, most of them are the same as the younger Futhark, the Scandinavian one. He added a couple more that are new. One particular was very new, it hadn't been seen before, which is called Gabor, which he added to the set. Now, they were very popular in Germany in that time frame, around the very early 1900s. And then, of course, things got a bit strange in Germany, shall we say, became very, very unpleasant. And a certain party took power in the 1930s, and they wanted to use runic symbolism. Often it's said that the Nazis used the Armanen runes for their rituals and their symbolism on the uniform. Again, not true at all. Von List was nothing to do with this movement at all. He was a nationalist, definitely, no doubt about that, but he wasn't connected with this far right that came along later on, decided to misuse the runes completely. And the Armanen runes are often linked, say, to the Nazis, even though they were never used by them. They used the Germanic runes, which were the popular ones at the time that were well known. So they kind of got a little bit forgotten, a bit ignored for quite a period of time. Until again, the 1960s, they kind of got rediscovered by a guy called Carl Spicberger, who wrote a book on the Armor and Runes and kind of brought them back to life and removed a lot of the older language that was tied up with them. Because in the 1930s, there were Armor and Runes writers who used some of the Nazi terminology, but they themselves disappeared during that period of time because they were seen as not being sort of off the party. Like they were removed. They basically disappeared. The Rune Masters of the 1930s of the Armor Runes disappeared. One we know ended up in a concentration camp and died there. Another one just went to South America, was never seen again. So they were enemies of the state. So they disappeared. But there hadn't been a lot of writing about them. But what I like about them is they are mystical. They are deliberately mystical, magical runes. They're not historic. They're designed for magical purposes, if you like, by von List and his immediate sort of co-writers. And there hadn't been anything written in English that was exclusively about the Armor and Runes. They've mentioned a few books. Stephen Flowers, Edgar Thorson mentioned a few of his books, but there wasn't a book specifically about them in English, and mine was the first. So that was kind of what made it a little bit unique.
That's very interesting.
Oh,
that's very interesting. What about them makes them magical? Is it the very fact that, like a tarot card said, it's a collection of them with a sort of almost sigil-like, I mean, to us,
yes,
language on them?
Yeah, that's it specifically. They were designed to be used for rituals for their Germanic connection to the landscape, if you like, that kind of idea.
A divination tool?
Yes, that was part of what they used for. I mean, there was divination. There's actually, I've included divination in my book, but they're more of a mystical process of, again, visualization, connection with visualization to those particular runes. And they connect. What made them particularly interesting for me was another major feature of runic magic, if you like, is the Yggdrasil, the world tree, with its 9 realms of Yggdrasil. Now, if you've got 24 runes, 29 or 33 and 16 runes, different sets, none of them match up particularly well because the maths don't work. But you've got 18 Armor and Runes and 9 realms. You've got 2 runes per realm. And what I discovered, which really blew my socks off, if you combine runes together, look at the combined meaning of 2, they match up with the name and meaning and the meaning of a realm. So you can match them up magically. I was quite taken aback how that worked. They actually work. When you combine the 2 meanings, you get, that's kind of that's what Niflheim, for example, means. It's the same thing. Yggdrasil. It just really struck me how the 2 connected together. I was really impressed by that. So that's one of the things because von List talked about kind of a runic Kabbalah, if you like, a Kabbalistic version, but runic, that would link to the world tree. But he never finished it, unfortunately, before he died. But it was an idea he was exploring. There was a kind of a correlate. So we've got tarot cards fit with the Kabbalah. The idea is like runic world tree, and the runes fit together in that same kind of the way they could work together.
Do you suppose that just evolved just through history and the local culture? They got a hold of some information, and eventually that information becomes, this. Yeah. This tree, for example.
It's an area of debate because some Armanus rune students, if you like, will say, no, these are ancient. They have been around a very long time, and they were rediscovered by von List. I'm not so sure. I think he was rather ingenious in what he came up with. But you could argue that they are almost a combination of all the previous runes. So they've come together, if you like, to be this particular set of runes. Excuse me. So you could say that they've combined together all the past information and crystallized them into this 18 rather, and you can work with those as a connection with those who have gone before.
Question out there from Carol. She asked about that Yggdrasil tree and reference to it being like a tree of life. Can you tell us a little bit about the Yggdrasil tree?
Yes, it's a connection of 9 realms, 9 worlds, with Midgard at the center where we live, and then they extend upwards and downwards and out. It's like a three-dimensional version, if you like. That sort of, the picture you've got there is like almost like a tree, but if you try the Yggdrasil as sort of a designed form, you'll get that sense of it being these worlds integrated with paths that connect together. And that's, so it's like, if you're going through with the Kabbalah, it looks a bit like that, but it's more three-dimensional. The Kabbalah tends to be quite flat, although it's supposed to be layers of levels. These sort of go north, south, east, west, etc., and up and down, and those realms then spread out. So the idea is that what I do in my book in Rune is you explore those 9 realms by using what are called bind runes, which is 2 runes put together to form a single shape, and you meditate on those, and they link to those particular worlds, and you can explore, much like the Quran stuff. It is that, for me, I like the scrying idea, this exploring out into these realms that are beyond us, and this gives you the tools to do that.
That's really cool. Philip asked, do you just throw them like dice and then read them? He's close. He's asking how you use.
Yeah, you can do. My book does contain 2 different ways of divining with them. I use it's like a chart thing, which you drop them onto, where they fall gives you what they mean, and in relation to those particular areas. There's one for like, you can read the future with, or deep within oneself, explore psychologically as well. Because I always tie back the psychological stuff. I am a psychotherapist, so I do tend to look at it from that angle. But I'm Carl Jung based very much with archetypes and collective unconscious, and I see these things coming from those deeper levels of our shared collective unconscious. So you're pulling information from deep within from there. So it's almost like it's from us, but it's also out there at the same time. It's pulling them together, so they kind of interconnect each other.
I just had a quick question. Do they need to be given to you by somebody else, or can you buy your own?
Oh, you buy and make your own. One of the things good about runes is they're so easy to make. You get 80 little bits of wood and just draw on them. Even bits of card, just draw on them. You can make it yourself very easily. That's one of the things that makes it much better than tarot cards, because you make your own tarot cards, take you forever. But instead of runes, you can do them in half an hour. You make them yourself easily. Yeah, I mean, I've heard those things about like tarot cards, you can't buy them yourself, they have to be bought for you. I've always bought my own cards. They've always worked. So.
A lot of people had asked that, that question is, do they have to be, given to you? So.
Well, I think with runes, because they're easy to make yourself, make them yourself, because then you've got a personal connection with something you've made yourself.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't buy armor and runes. You can, I'll tell a lie, you can buy armor and runes. There's a guy in America actually who makes them, but they're very expensive, not easy to get hold of. And bit of plug, those who buy, there's 3 levels of my book. There's a standard, there's paperback, hardback standards, there's a special, and there's the deluxe version, which comes with a set of I've made runes, which you get from the deluxe set. It's quite expensive, but yeah, so you get a set that I've made for you, but they're very easy to make. As I say, they're literally just line drawings on bits of wood. You are a
fan of those kind of deluxe editions, hardcover, really good quality paper. Stuff I guess I would call foolish fish stuff, right? If you've watched his channel. Fantastic channel, right?
Yeah.
YouTube about those kind of occult books. You might want to seek that stuff out, because it's probably in a limited edition, a collectible, and
there's only 10 copies of it. Actually, I think all 10 have sold now, I must admit, but they are a few £100 because they come in a nice box as well. But that's one thing about Troy, the English company, the publisher. They start from paperbacks upwards, so basically paperbacks like $10, $15. Easy to get hold of.
When you do that, do you throw your intentions as well into those runes?
How do we mean by making them, or when you're working with them?
Yes, when you're making them for that set.
Yeah, I'm very much thinking about what that runic symbol means. What the connection is. Those funny things. My brain switched off from the runes because I'm working on a different book at the moment, and that's how my brain tends to work. When I'm focused on doing that, I can read it off straight away. But mine's somewhere else now.
Interesting, right?
Yes.
It's an interesting thing. So naturally, it's going to bring about a few questions. I'm sure a lot of our audience has tarot cards or Ouija boards, but runes might be that kind of like thing that I've seen before, but don't know too much about. So it's cool that you can fill in some of those gaps. Linda asked, do homemade runes work just as well? I think
I would say better. Your personal intention is in there. Your personal connection with them is in there. Tarot cards, what I do, even if you spend hours shuffling around, moving them about, and you connect with them that way. But if you've made them, how more personal can you get than something you've made yourself? So absolutely, yeah, make them.
Exactly.
Hey, but one more question on that. Things like runes or pendulum in particular, pendulum work, is often thought about as being a subconscious tool, a tool that tunes into your subconscious. Like your subconscious has all the answers, and knows everything, almost like a direct connection to the Akashic records or whatever you want to call it, the collective unconscious. And you're just able to bring it about through maybe even the physical motion, whether it's the pendulum resting on your finger, the way you threw those runes with that intention, or the way you shuffled that tarot deck. Or do you believe in this? Do you think it is a subconscious, being a psychotherapist, Jungian type professional? Do you feel like it is our subconscious that's coming out? Is it a collective unconscious thing that we just tapped into at all times? Or is it more mystical than that? We're talking about non-human entities.
The middle one, the collective unconscious. It's for me that holds. It's one of those things that we can almost like a throwaway term, but the idea is not only is every human being that's alive now is mind linked, every human's ever lived is linked into it as well. So that deepest level of awareness is completely shared, and I think these things live within that. That's our connection to them. I don't think any of them are fully corporeal, physical beings, but they are there. They appear to us, and that's the kind of thing you're working with. So you're tapping into information and knowledge that goes back. I mean, the idea was there's no sense of time in there anyway. This stuff's been around for thousands of years, and some that were entered into those records, if you like to use that term, or look, it's unconscious 5,000 years ago. It was like it was yesterday. There's no history of time there. It's all there, and I think. For me, the idea is with the divination of predicting the quote future, which I don't like the idea of, because I don't think the future and past exist in the way we experience it. It's our experience of that makes it appear linear in the way we see it. But when you get to a quantum physics level, it all goes out the window. It's all affecting cause backwards to each other. It's like, so our idea of linearity is a construct in terms of how we experience linearity. So if you're looking for what's coming next, it's almost like, well, if you're heading down a particular path, if you're walking that way, you're going to get that place. And that's what these things can say. Your life's going in that direction. That's where you're going. That's where you're going to end up. Unless you change direction. So it might appear to be some kind of mystical, magical, look here, or here is the future. Well, actually, no, the future's here. It's here already. This is where your life's going to be if you carry on the way you're going.
And there may well be science behind that, right? I was watching an interview last night when we went to bed. Last thing I think we put on was this interview with Linda Moulton Howe talking to this. What did she describe herself as? A kind of a hybridization person.
Anunnaki.
It was Anunnaki hybrid person, and she was 22 years old, and she was saying that the aliens told her. I know that sounds a little far out for some of you, but told her that the predictions and divination was really psychic abilities in general, was a better understanding of the quantum fields happening around you in the present. You're able to see it because it's already happened on the quantum level, and you're just better tuned to seeing it. Yeah, that it wasn't, this kind of mystical thing, that it was really more of a science is where she was going with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always have some issue with the idea of the ancient aliens who've come from literal planets to literally change us, like they are like actual alien beings. I don't think they are at all. I think a lot of these things are those manifestations of this deep level of awareness. I was like, it's almost as if they kind of exist within us, but they are not separate to us, but they're not just us. It's always that kind of middle ground. I didn't go too deep with this, but we get caught up in what's known as the subject-object relations, the idea of us as subjects and the objects are out there. It's an old approach that's philosophical that is kind of breaking down really now, this whole notion of this division between this object-subject. You get beyond that and you're not dealing with it out there, it in here. It's this middle. It's all kind of a mushy mess, if you like. It kind of extends out from us.
I know what you mean. It's like just because it doesn't fit into the mold of our three-dimensional world,
right?
It doesn't necessarily mean it came from another planet. Like it just exists, coexisting with us. We're just unable to perceive it most of the time.
Well, this is when I first read sort of John Keel stuff. It was more Andy Collins who put me onto this. He's another writer. He talks about John Keel stuff as well. But the Keelian high strangeness, this whole notion of how we see these things as being aliens from other planets may be completely wrong. That if anything, they're probably from here. Like the ultra-terrestrial argument that they are alternate realities or exist within us here, but are not fully corporeal. We don't quite see them, but they're around us all the time. I find that made more sense. What I was struck with, and I've read this said elsewhere, but it struck me was when you look at descriptions of aliens, most of them are humanoid in size and shape. Therefore, they come from a planet with very similar gravity. Often they have no facial mask or anything, so they have an atmosphere that's like ours. They don't seem to be completely covered over, so therefore the exposure to bacteria and viruses, they must be the same as ours. They breathe in the same air as us. They seem to be okay with our bugs. They're from here, just a different version of here. Rather than from some planet 1,000 light years away, they're from an alternate version of here, this world. And then another thing that was struck was the idea of we have time progression as we see it. If an alternate reality that exists parallel with us, their time is very, very slightly faster, 1 nanosecond faster than ours. Over 1 million years, they're far ahead of us already. So they may have that technology to cross over. And I think that's what happens these kind of things. They're crossing from barrier to barrier, from universe to universe, reality to reality. Older times, you look back at the folklore stuff. And the other book I wrote was about folklore and witchcraft.
Oh, yes.
Stories about things seen come either out of the ground, was the most common source for strange entities, or appear from nowhere. They never talk about things coming from the sky, coming down from the sky. It was always from the ground out, or would appear and disappear. There's no spacecraft. I've got dozens and dozens of folklore books from the 1800s, Victorian, and there are lots of first-hand stories of very strange experiences, but then none of them are spaceships. They don't describe things in the sky. These things come out of the ground predominantly.
I think that's so interesting when you talk about things like giants, and when you think about cataclysmic events that have happened to civilizations, of whether there were people there that we don't know about, or if it was like the Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? We use that as an example on the show a lot because there are millions of them. We've only found a couple hundred, sets of bones, but we know that neuroscience says that there were millions of them, like all around. And have lizards today, they would have had to go into the ground at the time because of
underground, right?
Meteoric impacts on the planet and things of that nature.
Tectonic plates, volcanoes,
shifting, and they would have to go underground. So like creatures of the past would have had to go underground to evolve to what they are today.
Adaptation.
And adapt, become the mammalian entities that we are, these bodies of consciousness. It's so fascinating to know historically, when you look in the folklore, which of course there's got to be a little bit of truth to that history, that things would come from the ground.
Yeah.
Let's touch on some of that, the British witchcraft and its origins. And we know a little bit about it. I think it was somebody I was reading about, Isabel Godin. I mentioned her a couple times on the show because she did all the confessions, Scottish witch.
Yes.
From, I believe, the 1500s. I might have that wrong. I don't have the information in front of me, but I found her fascinating because her confessions are all recorded. And they are very detailed, and they're about things like, having sex with the devil. And then you look at the impact of religion and governments at the time, and like who was being targeted with the witchcraft trials, those burning times. It was mostly like outspoken women.
Yeah.
For the most part. And, a big to-do is made about the Salem witches, which was like 20 or 22 people got convicted of witchcraft in Salem.
20 here in Salem, yes.
It's a very low number of people when there's just so many people have been persecuted and killed, by our governments and religious organizations, prior to that. I don't feel like they get enough due a lot of times. Maybe you could comment on that and tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, my book comes forward in time a little bit. Mine's a collection. Stuff from the beginning. Basically, how it really came about was that often we talk about things called black books of magic. They're collections of folkloric magic. And there's quite a few in Scandinavia. There's a few been published a few years back. And there are records of these books existing here in the UK. But they've all disappeared. They've been lost. They don't know what's happened to them. And what I thought would be interesting, I've got quite a large collection of folklore books from the Victorian age, from the Folklore Society, who used to publish a lot of books. And a lot of them, I say, as mentioned before, they've got stories of strange experiences, but they also have first-hand accounts of magic, actual witchcraft spells and incantations and charms. And what I wanted to do was collect them all together in an anthology of genuine first-hand described spells from right up to the 1930s. The 1930s was the cutoff because it was copyright. I could reproduce material before the 1930s perfectly legally in the UK because it's That's it. Yeah, wicked old decay. It's older and it's legal to reproduce them. But there was no one's ever bothered to sit and collect them all together. And I look for the more interesting ones, so to get rid of the foul spirits and demons, that kind of thing. So there are proper, real first-hand accounts of witchcraft practice. The vast majority of them were older women who lived usually on the edge of the village, which seems a bit strange, but they were the spells and charms that they'd described to the Victorian folklorists. Interesting folklore became very popular in the Victorian age. It was the first time when people had leisure time to go out and explore the countryside and read as well. So a lot of these sort of people living in larger cities would go out to the communities out and far and wide as the railways were spreading across the country to explore these areas and to talk to these old folks about their times, their charms, their customs and practices. And they're all in these books. But occasionally you find actual spells. I have probably 50 plus of those books sort of they're boxed away. So I don't have space in this room for all of them. And I picked them quite cheaply on book fairs, that sort of thing. And I just thought it would be good to go through them. And I found quite a lot of these sort of spells and put them all together into this book. So you look at modern witchcraft as it's practiced now. You've got the Wicca movement, of course, which is more of a religion now, actually, that Joel Garner started. It is modern. It's not got any real history to it prior to God. I mean, Garner claims it's part of a coven in the New Forest. Doris Clutterbuck who led it. There's no evidence she existed. There was definitely a Golden Dawn-esque group that was based in that area who he met and was communicating with. And if you break down some of the stuff you get in the Wiccan material, it is Golden Dawn influence. There's ritual, ceremonial magic in there that's a little similar to that. You have what's called traditional witchcraft now. It's become much more popular. In fact, Troy Books, who published the Rune book, they're best known for traditional witchcraft books. They did a similar kind of thing as I did and used a lot of the older material to put together modern traditional practices. But they're a synthesis of those different material. You got things like William Bottrell's book on Cornish magic and books around that kind of time. It's kind of come together. My book, is the actual stuff that was used. It's not coherent. It's not a structured plan of magic. It's lots of individual spells for certain practices and certain things you want to do. So it's like, I always get told off and say real witchcraft, but it's the actual things these people were doing collected together pretty much for the first time, as far as I can see, as far as anyone can see. It's the first time anyone's actually gone through and collected them together. So that was how that book came about.
That's fascinating. I love that. What would be a good example? And I asked because we were watching a movie last night. And we talked about it in the introduction to the show. Mm-hmm. And it was called, what was it?
Which one?
What to do next?
We need to do something.
Oh, we need to do something. That is a good theme for that movie. But it goes in, and I don't want to no spoilers here, but there's a mention or they're showing a necromantic spell that involved what was supposed to be a cow's tongue being bound and put into a jar and kind of like a jar spell kind of thing. Along with some other accoutrements. It was very fascinating. Kind of reminded me of kind of more of an old school sort of, bit of magic that you might find maybe in this book. Like, what would be a good example?
Well, the vast majority of them are basically incantations. They are just things you're supposed to say. Just literally words, nothing more than that. Most of them don't involve much in the way of material because they had nothing to work with pretty much. So often they are just literally words. I mean, I can grab a copy of my book and read some if you like.
Yes, please. That would be wonderful. Sure. Absolutely.
Sure. Absolutely. And again, that was a really cool movie. It was a real sense of dark humor.
It was
in it.
Funny, that was so bad.
It was sort of hilarious through the whole movie.
That would be me.
It's also horrifying at the same time.
I mean, occasionally there are things that are sigils you would draw, charms you'd actually create, but most often they're just literally things you would say. I mean, for example, protection from the bite of a mad dog. To prevent evil effects from the bite of a mad dog, write on an apple or a piece of fine white bread the following charm and swallow it in 3 mornings in a row. So you get an apple, you write on a piece of bread, O King of Glory, come in peace. Pax, Max, and Max. Hax, Max, Ad Max, Opera, Calder. That's it. It's like, what?
That's all.
Yeah, that's it.
They were simple. They were folk magic things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Very straightforward. I mean, some of it you can tell there's a Christian influence. They've borrowed things from the Bible, perhaps, and retranscribed them. Some of them are almost gibberish, but they've been repeated, obviously, by generation to generation. But this is what the folklorists recorded. To raise a storm against an enemy. Take a rag and dip it into water and then beat it with a heavy piece of wood, while saying the following incantation. I beat the rag upon this stain. I raise the wind in the devil's name. It shall not fail until I please again. And that apparently creates a storm. I mean, whether these things work, I don't know.
Probably repeated, maybe turned into a chant, and it has almost a, for lack of a better term, a rap-like feel. It's sort of a little bit of
incantations. Usually, the idea is you keep saying them, you repeat them over and over again. Or sometimes you expect to, like, say every morning for 3 days or something on those lines, or repeat them. But usually, this kind of stuff is mantric in nature, as in you just keep repeating them. But they're all pretty much straightforward. There's not major. I mean, one or two of them that you do a bit of drawing on stone and paper, but predominantly it's just literally read the incantation.
Yeah, I love that. And looking at the Isabel Gowdy stuff, I noticed, we thought this was pretty interesting, that, it seemed like the church and the government turned it into the devil. And like prior to that, she was working with the Fae.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful. There's a lot of political backdrop to a lot of this. It's a lot of trying to keep male power and the influence of, again, a common thing would be you didn't like that person, so I claim they did X, Y, Z. They get called up for witch trials. They go and you get their land, you get their property. And it was a way of getting rid of people you didn't particularly like. Often the accusations, because there were lots and lots of trials. You said not many were found guilty, but a lot of trials, when they're like, it's just ridiculous. Obviously, you don't like the person, you've made this stuff up about them. So,
didn't they kill a pig or a dog? They hung a pig or a dog or something around here. I forgot. I have to go look that up. But yeah,
probably
they did. In New England,
people would try to get, like you said, people's land. Sometimes they would want the milk of the neighbor's cow.
Yeah,
it was interesting, and there were spells written around that. The cow.
There are quite a few spells that do talk about that. Improving the crops and for the cows. I didn't bother with those; it's a bit boring. The most common spell,
commodity, right?
Jeez.
Agriculture was the commodity.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to just say real quick, Philip Wyatt wants you to read a money spell, please, and his lights just flickered.
Yes, I noticed the flash as well. I just saw what he said there. I'm like,
I saw flashes right after he said that on your side. Yes,
I saw it too. I don't know why. I mean, I moved the book about. Maybe that was causing the. No, it's not really, is it?
That was weird. And I kept looking. I took my glasses off. I'm like, wait a minute.
After
relax spell.
20 plus years of
actually it just flashed.
I think that might be your computer, but I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. It could be the camera adjusting to the lighting in there.
Well, the thing is, after 20 plus years of doing ritual magic in this room, there could be all sorts of things going on in here. Yes, there's again, look, see the weird flashes. I'm not doing anything.
What is that? Is that your light? Is that your computer?
Nothing's changing in this room. I'm not moving. I will do is move the book.
Just adjusting. It's good. We'll, give it a rational explanation.
We all love this.
But
all our listeners,
we're familiar with things happening in the studios. And
I did a radio show. I used to be an old show called the KTPF, Keep the Paranormal Friendly, about 10 years ago now, and we had a guest who, it's like this, it was live on camera. We had a guest who was a good friend of the three of us who used to the show together. He brought a picture called The Anguished Man. It's a very strange painting. It's got quite a history to it, and we did like a seance with the painting live. And I tell you, the weird noises that were coming through. It was caught live, we just recorded it as well, and you can hear them. It's amazing. So you talk about strange stuff happening. It's like when you talk about it, you start to manifest. So you have to be careful.
I have no doubt. Yeah,
most definitely. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't have a money spell in there that I can recall without going through it. But I tell you, the most common spell and question that the folklore books had that I didn't bother with, because it wasn't in the theme, was love. You want to know who your love's going to be, you know, who are they going to be, what they're going to be like. There's so many of those. It was ridiculous.
But what about free will? When I see those things, I always think about free will. It's like, I don't do those kind of things. I don't need to.
Yeah.
So he's been in my life all my life.
She enchanted me long ago. And I'm still here.
Magic is designed in accordance to work with one's will, but whether you're willing over somebody else, then that becomes the problem. You know, if you're trying to make someone fall in love, it was more about finding out who your love was going to be, not trying to make someone fall in love with you. It was like, what they're going to look like, you know, what's their background. That was the kind of thing that they would do. Yeah,
it does have a sort of teenage girl sound to it, like, will you have dark hair?
Well, will you have a if who you marry could change your life completely in those days. If the guy had your money, then, well, you know, life will transform. So you can see what it's important to them.
Philip says, nope, love is trouble.
It doesn't stop us, does it? Let's be honest.
Carol mentioned that when you read the thing with the rag, I saw a shadow in front of me. So there you go. Now we've got shadow people involved. We're getting in deep. Andy, we're getting deep
the
here.
Interesting thing, I'll tell you a little funny story, quite true story. I've had more than one medium tell me there's a tall, dark figure around me, but he's there. He's a friend. He's to protect you. And when I tried to connect with it to see if it was there, I got an Encarons on. So, you know, maybe it's him.
It could be. It really could be.
Around, but yeah, it's funny. You know, people, you get mediums to tell you they got this figure around. That person's your Aunt Nellie or great aunt, whatever. No, there's a tall, dark figure behind you. Okay. I don't mind. Don't bother me.
We get a lot of that because we talk to a lot of mediums, and it is interesting when they start to correlate.
Yes.
You know,
yeah, that's it. Exactly.
You go, oh, well, maybe there's something to this.
My favorite one was Philip Wyatt, because he had said to me one day, hey, who's the guy behind you? Like, this was after the show, I believe. And with the cowboy hat, making jokes. And my grandfather, his name was Tex, his nickname, because he was from Texas. And he was, for some reason, he was like with me and my son for like a couple of days and stuff. And sure as heck, he picked that up. And I was like, holy moly. Imagine that. Yeah.
That's right. Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. He didn't know any of that stuff, so it's interesting.
Absolutely.
Nicholas says the artist must have really made an imprint on the soul of the artwork. Artists connect 100% with their medium. And there's a muse, right?
Muse. I'm going to say it's the muse.
And the nature of inspiration, which is a pretty fascinating subject, too. Right. Do you think that when people are truly inspired, that they are connecting with some other entity for that inspiration, like giving a nudge?
I think it's possible that you're connecting again with that kind of collectivity of ideas that draw you in and lift you up at the same time, and that kind of connection builds up. It's one of those things because the muse is obviously it's a Greek thing, the idea of this actual being that comes to you. Again, all these things could be that's what you're seeing manifest. I mean, there's a thing I talk about Bigfoot, was specifically what I find really fascinating. This the transdimensional Bigfoot, if you like, in like literally becomes so real at these footprints and then just vanishes. That these things become so real within our reality, but they're not actually in it. But they seem so incredibly real. And I think that plays a big part. Because this subject-object thing, this kind of discrete subject and objects, not being as such, so they're kind of crossing over each other. There's a blending, if you like.
Do you think that has to do with all of us, our collective consciousness at all? Everybody with Bigfoot?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to push it to the unconscious level rather than a conscious collectivity of awareness. Okay. But really, I always like the best analogy I like is to look out across a great ocean with lots of islands around, and the islands appear separate, disconnected from each other until you get under the surface of the water down to the ocean's floor, and they're all connected. It's just the illusion of discreteness, of separation, that we live in an illusion of separation of us, that there is a collectivity to our awareness. Individual thought processes in your head, that's you, but there's a level of awareness and collectivity. I see it time and again with my own therapeutic work, when clients start to describe stuff that I know is from Greek mythology, for example. It's symbolism and imagery that they've no knowledge of, they couldn't have. but yet they talk about similar experiences in terms of internal experiences of from dreams and things like that. I mean, I not so much now. I used to use hypnosis quite a lot as a way of simply accessing thought, not trying to get memories of the past. Well, yeah, memories of the past, but I don't feed them any information. It's what's called hypnoanalysis, where it's purely what are you seeing, what you're remembering, what you're experiencing. Most often it's from childhood stuff, because most, getting down the therapeutic road now, but most people with personal traumas comes from childhood experiences of some form or another. But occasionally it goes deeper. And they're describing and seeing experiences that they couldn't have had themselves. Imagery of and dragons, beasts like that, serpents eating themselves, coming through the ground. You know, they're not real experiences, but they are similar to what other people have also experienced and had. Then you think there's something more here, definitely. You know, this is, and I said, the training in the sort of Jungian approach that came after my initial training in psychotherapy. I went in that direction because it made more sense than rather the Freudian approach, which is much more, it's narrower, shall we say, is the best way to put it.
Tell me about your mother.
Right.
Now, we just got your message, so you're going to take a moment and come back with no worries. We can do that. No
I
worries.
return in a moment, ladies and gentlemen.
Sure. Just pop back. We'll pull you back right in the stream. Take your time. Yeah, so that is super interesting, you know, and you have to wonder, and I think one thing we might talk about when he comes back is these things that are in the collective consciousness, are they real? You know, are they a real thing because we thought of them so much as humanity, you know, be they things like Greek gods or
Pantheons.
The pantheons, or, you know, other things of that nature. Do they become real because we thought about them so much, or were they real to begin with and were maybe otherworldly or maybe interdimensionally have a power? And that power can still pervade our consciousness today, you know, in this sort of linear timeline fashion that we call reality.
We have to use the labels because, you know, we need to understand.
I just like words.
We just like words.
It's great to see you guys out there in the audience. I see there's all kinds of conversations going on.
That's our girl.
Hey, Anita Allen. Hey, Echo Leaf. And everybody we've talked to. Philip, how's it going? I loved your shameless plug.
Oh, that was so good.
Good stuff. Irene Takura and Joshua. Exactly. As far as the islands, I'm trying to follow this back. There's a whole bunch of things going on.
Yes,
I know it's on different pages. Stephen Auclair of Silly Rabbit fame, we shall say. Is that in our audience today?
Sorry, I coughed.
And he's also been on our show. He's actually on one of our most popular shows. As it turns out. Right? What do you figure, Steve? You know, how does that happen? Awesome.
Anita, she's so sweet.
Joshua says it can become collective consciousness.
Did you say Reggie? Reggie Randall's out there.
Reginald Randall. Who does a lot of talking to spirit.
Yes.
And we may be talking to him a little bit more about that, I think, in the near future. Eric says, the word is the bird.
Oh, come on. I say that
Kristen
all the time.
says that all the time. The Family Guy saying.
Yeah.
Bird is the word.
I say that to my kids. I'm like, what's the word? They'll say it. And when we do it, yeah. All right, don't get me started. It'll just be in my head forever. And I have Godsmack in my head right now. So.
Steve says, I think the collective consciousness conscience can conjure.
Absolutely.
Yes. And look, it's conjured.
That's why I asked about Bigfoot. Yeah.
I have returned.
To the microphone, sir.
I suppose one of the things you could also say, the strict division between conscious and unconscious, again, is a myth. It's a very subtle layering of conscious awareness about things. So when you say the deepest level of awareness is the unconscious, it could be potentially mirrored as a higher level of consciousness as well. So the hierarchical structure could be forgotten about a little bit. So, I mean, it's a personal thing because of a Jungian psychotherapist. We do talk collective unconscious, very specifically about unconscious, but it doesn't say it is just that, you know. I am trained in that area, but I have my own ideas. It's an old joke about psychotherapists. If you take 20 psychotherapists and you train them a new technique, you have 20 versions of that technique. No one will be the same.
20 new techniques, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's only ever one Jungian psychotherapist. That was Carl Jung. That was it. There's no others. It's just him.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
That is interesting. I mean, I suppose, just, you know, top of my head, maybe from experience, maybe some of these things actually are real things, and they're not just say memories or projections of our intentions out there in the fields around us, if you will.
Yeah. One of your, Philip mentioned the very important thing we haven't said so far, is the tulpa theory. You know, the idea of manifestation of things, that we generate them. I would agree absolutely.
Most definitely, I think we do as well.
I can give you a story of a real example of where I kind of inadvertently did that, but as an experiment that seems to have worked. I'm never going to reveal where this happened because I'm the only one that knows. There's a location in the UK that I used to go to quite often on paranormal investigations, and I wanted to try and see if you could create something from the energies that were there. I had a very specific idea of a particular image in mind, a particular being, shall we say, and I kind of put the intention out there that this thing was real. Didn't talk about it, but had in mind a particular being, a particular person. It was a fictional character, but the description I tried to sort of implant in the place, shall we say. And time went by, and going on new investigations at the same locations, people started seeing the figure I'd effectively made up. Although he was historic and real, I'd moved him from one place and put him into this particular place. There was no record of him being seen there, but until repeatedly, I was going there a lot because it was a regular place I was working at. I was literally working as an events company, and people started describing to me what it looked like. It was like, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's good.
That reminds me
Philip the Ghost.
Of Philip the Ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An experiment surrounding that in 1972 paranormal experiment in Toronto, where they kind of invented this history of a ghost of a person who had lived and died, and all these stories about them, and now it seemed to come true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this was my own experiment in the Phillips experiment, that kind of implanting an environment with a particular idea of this appearance. I never told anybody, and never told anybody where the location was and what it looked like. Some people know what it looks like, but don't know where it was. I never said where it was to anybody. And yet people started telling me about this figure they'd seen in this particular area. And I thought, that's exactly what I described. It was not the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Philip mentions that, it's the Philip experiment. And then there you go. And it kind of was.
And then you think when we say we go out, do an investigation or anything, Chris saw this gray man in one of the cemeteries that we were at. I did not see him, but he did something anyway, that I saw. But he went back to the history and people were seeing this gray man.
They described him the same way as being gray.
Yeah.
It's distinctly gray.
That reminded me of that.
Saw him for half a second.
Yeah.
And we had this kind of weird phenomena happen with the shrubbery we were looking at, believe it or not. It's weird.
And then he told us to get out.
Flipped and it made a big noise. Then there was an EVP that came right after all these things happened. I just started to say, I just saw something. And
you saw the video. I'm like, I'm out.
That just freaked Kristen right out. But that was interesting. And Steve, you will know that is Elder Ballou Cemetery. Elder Ballou, who founded a Baptist church in Cumberland, Rhode Island, many, many years ago. Interesting stuff. Anita says, Andy, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man stays in New York.
It wasn't him. What I described was not him. Funnily enough, this was, again, about 20 years ago, but it adheres to a particular variation, shall we say, of more modern ghostly phenomenon. It would come under the category of Hat Man. The guy was dressed in Edwardian, sickly clothing with a tall top hat on. This is the guy I described that I was imagining in the site of the place. I took the name from a genuine figure who has paranormal connections and was imagining, visualizing over and over again being in this particular area, and as it's always been seen. But this is before Hat Man became a thing. I mean, it's one of the funny things you've noticed probably in the last few years. A lot of new subdivisions of ghosts have come into existence. Hat Man and Grinning Man. Again, I think they're still the same stuff. It's just our interpretation. Now we're starting to see these different forms appearing. Because when there are lots of ghost stories in these folklore books I've got, but none of them describe anything like that. They tend to be more kind of misty grey figures are being seen, or men in uniform, that kind of thing, historic figures, rather than anything more modern, shall we say, in terms of description. I mean, one of the ones I find absolutely fascinating from a psychological perspective as well is Slender Man. Slender Man is a complete invention, total invention. It's completely deliberately made up. And yet people claim to now see it. You start to wonder, well, is something now manifesting in that form? Because enough people are starting to think it's out there, they're starting to see it, for real seeing it, if you like. Not realizing it's there, but that's what their experience is now.
That's what they perceive.
That's
right. So that's what the brain knows, and that's what they perceive. It also follows ufology. When people were seeing saucers, and that was the science fiction of the day, more people saw saucers than anything, right? And it kind of changed over time into other things that would appear
cigar
in
shape
science fiction.
Someone pointed out a while ago, absolutely fascinating. The first reports of triangular UFOs were around about the early 1980s. One of the biggest films in 1983 was Empire Strikes Back, with big triangular Star Destroyers. So
that's right.
That's interesting. Predominantly UFO occupants before Whitley Strieber were little green men, that kind of thing. The Greys became seen much more commonly after Strieber's book, Communion. It's like this influence, and there's a kind of duality of influence going on here. Again, not saying things are made up, but they're manifesting, again, things that fit cultural identity. Carl Jung, in his book about flying saucers, that's what he talks about. It's a manifestation of cultural identity that's coming into form. That it's an expression of us again. Again, not saying they're not real, they're not saying imagined, but they are expressing of us, if you like.
It's like those things come through, and not to sound too conspiracy, but and I hate to use this example of 9/11, but like around the time of 9/11, there were lots of things coming through popular culture that happened to show things that look like Twin Towers burning. Like one of them was a record by a band we like a lot called Dream Theater. It released, and it actually got released. This is a crazy story, and it's totally true. Like, look this up. It's not crazy tales here from the conspiracy graveyard. Which we don't adhere to, but their record was called Live in New York, and of course, naturally, it had Twin Towers on it. It was released on 9/11, and they had to pull the cover because it kind of showed like New York on fire because they had played a show there, and
it was the Twin Towers burning.
Yeah, that was pretty much the record cover, right? And there were other examples of things like that. You go, what? How is that even possible? What are the odds that would work out that way? They're mathematically impossible, next to impossible.
Well, there was a book published in, I think it was 1909, that detailed a maiden voyage of a ship, a passenger liner, the largest in the world at the time, crossing from the UK to New York, that sunk in the middle of the Atlantic, called the Titan. 2 years later, or 3 years later, Titanic. It's like, whoa. It's one of the, actually funny enough, we covered at university in the cultural studies. What you've got going on there is the writer looking at how things are happening, technology moving too fast. It was his idea that we're getting too big and grandiose what we think we can do. And the culmination of that would be we create a disaster, the Titan. That's the novel. And the fact it mirrored reality wasn't some kind of prediction in the future. It was that's how things were going. As we were saying before with the runes and tarot reading, if you're going in a certain direction, you can kind of see where it's going to lead to. The fact the ship was called Titan and the Titanic, both big, the largest things you could think of. So the names, similar names, made sense. On the surface, it can look like it's some kind of weird kind of prediction in the future. It's not. It's a rational expectation from what's happening around us. That was the interesting thing, as I say, with the novel. It was, even the writer himself said at the time that this is what I thought could happen, and that's what I wrote about. And it did happen. I didn't make it happen, obviously, but it happened because the world was going the way I thought it was going to lead to the Titan and Titanic sinking. And I thought that was really fascinating.
Oh, definitely. It's that kind of like that saying, I think it's tossed around chaos magic, everything and nothing is real. It's like everything's already happened. The past, present, future are all kind of one thing, and it's all occurred, and we're just going through the motions, and then these examples of it seem to pop out. Maybe it's the collective.
Well, I think the thing is, nothing happens quite how you think it does. That's the thing. There's one thing I can take away from the 20 years as a psychotherapist is people's experiences of what they believe is happening to them is realer, if you like, more real than what actually happens. In terms of how something affects you, what you experience doesn't necessarily have to be exactly cohere with nature around you, but it's more real for you, and that affects how you think and what you do next. It has that. We have so many preconceived ideas and notions of what we think is real and how the world works. Excuse me. That carries into everything we experience. One of the common things I notice on ghost investigations is people could be in the same group and have a different experience of the same phenomenon, but see it differently, experience it differently. And you think, well, what's going on there? It's something about how you experience something and what your belief systems that you come into it with. Let's go back to the phenomenology thing we were talking about at the beginning. If you try to strip as much of that away as possible and look at what you actually experience, it's sometimes quite different to what you think you're experiencing. But it doesn't mean to say you don't experience something. One of the things, an event occurred 5 years ago in a place called Woodchester Mansion, which was absolutely amazing. I was on the second ever investigation at there. It's a commonplace now, but it was quite not done much in the early 2000s. The first time people have been there was the Ghost Club, the original Ghost Club from the 1800s. They went there in about 1999, I think it was. And one phenomenon they experienced was the sound of heavy rock falling, as if the roof was caving in. Nothing fell. There was no problem at all. But it was quite loud, they said. It was heard in much of the building. When we were there, on the third or fourth time there, we heard the same thing. Myself and a friend of mine, we were in this room together. We heard it quite clearly. Two people in the room with us didn't. And yet it was like, did you not hear that? No. I mean, again, it was a paranormal phenomenon. There was nothing had fallen. We checked to make sure, but nothing had fallen. But yet two of us heard it very clearly. But the other two in the room with us never heard it. And that was really strange. It was like, deaf? No, didn't hear it. What are you talking about? You didn't that rumble? No.
Oh, we believe you.
We talk about that a lot, as a matter of fact.
Phenomena like that as well.
Yes.
Things that we heard, like people yelling at us that weren't on the recorders, that we were hearing them.
It's not that. We were just talking about, it was one point where Chris heard a boar, which aren't indigenous to, we were talking about this with the boar last night, in our area at all, being in New England. And at the same time, I heard a woman laughing, I'm going to say it, maniacally. So we both looked at each other and I said, did you hear that? He goes, yeah, I heard that. He's like, it was a boar. I'm like, what? No, it's a woman. He's like,
yeah, we were puzzled.
We both heard different things.
That was such a weird day. It was, as far as phenomena, and the other thing I just referenced happened on that same day, where Kristen was listening through a digital recorder, and had headphones on similar to this, where everything she was hearing was coming through the recorder. We both heard somebody yell, "Hey, hello," or I guess it's hello to us, and we jumped and we were like freaking out and all this stuff, and none of it's on the recorder except us freaking out over it.
Bizarre. Yeah.
Well, how did you hear that?
How do you explain that? You know,
how did that work? That was actually that same day. So, yeah, phenomena is very strange. Phenomenology. I like. Yes. I love that.
One of the things I do know, again, keeping my psychological hat on for a little while, is that one of the most common audio hallucinations, should say, is your own name being called, because you're so used to hearing it. You know, it's a very common one that doesn't have to mean it's paranormal, but it is one of those ones that's quite common. If you hear your name being called, there's a chance that it's just in your head, literally. And we can imagine it ourselves. Imagine your name being called by somebody, like your mum, for example. It's easy to imagine. It is. And that's why we record a lot of stuff. Yeah. Because,
it's weird that you said that. My son constantly thinks, he'll go, "What, Mom?"
Yeah.
I never said anything. And I'm like, nope, wasn't me this time. Sorry, kid. But that's weird to him, and it kind of freaks him out. He's 15 now. So, but yeah, I mean, he's been doing this for years.
Yeah. But speaking of kids, actually, that's good, because I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier about psychotherapy and things happening in people's childhoods. If there's, one thing we have noticed, besides the similarities I mentioned and commonalities between phenomena in our different interviews that we've done, is that most of our guests have had some sort of childhood experience with that phenomena. Be it, a hat man, be it, an alien abduction experience, or a UFO floating outside their bedroom window. In my case, clowns; her case, shadow people. Like clowns that were not normal clowns. They wanted to kill my parents. Not good stuff. There was some sort of childhood experience, almost traumatic, that seems to lead to an interest to it later in life.
That is pretty much universal from my experience. people who've had some anomalous experience when they're young, it opens something. There's a line in the Mothman Prophecies movie, which I think is really good. It's that idea that you noticed them and they noticed that you noticed. And then there's a connection starts to form. And I do think there's something to that. That's why people can go their whole life and never experience anything. Friend Steve Ward, who I showed this with, never experienced anything. He's fascinated, but he never experienced a damn thing. Why? I don't know. He doesn't know, but he hasn't. My first experience was when I was about 10 years old. I'll clear the story if you like.
Please do.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I was just people have listened to the PAUK radio network and heard me talking before. I've heard this story 1,000 times, but it's absolutely true what happened to me. I was about 10, 11 years old. Now, local to where I live is a place called Cold House Fort. It's an old fort from the Napoleonic times originally on the Thames estuary. It was built up a bit more in the First World War and again in the Second World War because it was obviously protecting the routes to London. Because obviously World War II, especially the bombers would follow the Thames at night leading to London. So, of course, these guns would be able to shoot them down. But by the 1970s, it was completely closed down. It was quite dilapidated. The inside was quite dangerous in parts. It was corrugated iron all the way around. You're not supposed to get in there. But if you get inside, there's a large area, like a parade ground, if you like, where kids would get inside and just play football and stuff like this. This was a sunny summer's afternoon on a Sunday. I was in there with my brother, I think was there, but there were some other kids playing football together, what you call soccer, you kick the ball about. And I looked at the ground, I can see him like it was yesterday, it was just 40 odd years ago now. Looked down, looked up, and there were two men walking past about 10 feet away, dressed in uniform. It was like a mid-greeny kind of colour. And what I noticed that really caught my eye was like wrapping around below the knee level. I remember that was pretty quite unusual. I looked up, looked at them, looked away and looked back and thought, what the? And they were gone. Probably 5 or 6 seconds looking at them, walking past, as solid as anything, as real as anything, walking towards where there was no doors or wall or anything. It was afterwards I found out that they were wearing uniform from the First World War. Around the legs was common in the First World War uniform, not in the Second World War. And there were two men in uniform from the First World War walking past me who would have been there, would have been stationed there during the war. And it was real as anything, solid as normal. There was no sound. I mean, the kids were playing football and shouting, whatever. You couldn't really hear a lot, but there was no sound of them walking or anything. It just passed me. 5 or 6 seconds I looked at them, looked away, and it twigged. I mean, I'm like 10, 11 years old, so I thought, that's weird. And that was it. I went outside, told my parents about it, oh, that's nice. That was it.
What are they going to say, you know?
Exactly. But that was it. It wasn't like some cold, dark winter's night in the dark with a torch and whatever. Summer's afternoon. Two guys walking past, as solid as anything. It's like, what did I just see? And as I say, describing that, I can see it like it was yesterday. It was 40 odd years ago now. It's just weird stuff, you know. And that began my interest. So
that's really interesting. Like, that makes me wonder, like, what is the effect of the collective consciousness?
Well, it would fit
like
a memory trigger.
Right.
A residual haunting. So exactly, like a battlefield. That sort of thing. Gettysburg, you know, here in the U.S., World War I, other wars, any war, Native American hauntings that we talk about a lot. You know, what is the effect from a Jungian point of view?
It would be the very fact that, as I say, that level of awareness, there's no sense of time anyway. So something can trigger off the image and you see it. I mean, I would say that I don't think they were literally there. It was in my mind of seeing them, but they seem very real to me. Now, what I know now, I would say that then you'd have asked me, no, two men walked past me, you know, two guys walked past me. But I think it's like the variation of the stone tape theory, which you probably are very familiar with, I'm sure. But I see it as more the EM field theory, that the electromagnetic field of a location holds the energy and can be triggered off. Well, what means, I don't know. What causes that triggering, I don't know. But something causes the triggering to occur. So you find yourself experiencing those kind of experiences. And when you've had one, it's like your mind is attuned to that energy being in place and you start to see more stuff.
Right. I think Rupert Sheldrake talks about the sort of external memory, and I forget the verbiage he uses for that, but it's like something gets held like in this kind of memory, and it's kind of almost like the collective unconscious, you know, like there's a sort of field.
Morphic field theory. Morphic field.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've read his stuff. It's fascinating. I think it's excellent stuff.
Yeah,
yes, we love
very
Rupert Sheldrake.
interesting guy. Super interesting. Go ahead.
So I will answer the question that Carol was asking, have I ever seen that again? Not that specifically, but I've been back to Cold House Fort a number of times because moving forward in time, they decided to open it up for ghost investigations. It was become quite popular for that. And I've got some audio recordings of that we took there that are very strange. There's I've never mentioned before to you guys, I used to run, I still kind of do run a channel called The Cryptic Files, which is a collection of videos. They're a bit like Nuke's Top 5, that kind of 5 ghost videos. And some of them I find off the internet and some of them my own. And one of which we've got, there is myself and a friend with a medium walking ahead of us. And the medium's talking, and I say to my friend, he's here again, referring to what the medium's just said. And there's voice that says, why, Jimmy? It's like, what? You don't hear it at the time at all, but it's clear as anything on the recording, like a gravelly kind of very strange. Now, the site itself, the fort itself, has a corridor that runs around the perimeter of it, and there are lots of small rooms that were storage for munitions, and those corridors are dug into the earth. And we found out, again, years ago now, but they found some Roman remains in the area. So it looks like the site is very old. We know the first building goes back to Elizabethan times, 1500s, but apparently there's been some Romans. 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So a bit of pottery in the immediate vicinity of Cold House Fort. So it is actually very old. And again, we talk about disturbance underground because these things are below ground level. So it's underground disturbances again, triggering things off. Sure.
Yeah, we definitely believe that.
Philip asks, do you think these events can be held in a Schumann resonance?
Very possibly. Very possibly. There's that sort of that frequency level, yeah. And it's one of those things, I think, because we've got energies around us all the time, it's always there, that these things, the recordings like exist in there, and somehow there's an interaction that starts to trigger these things off, definitely.
Anita Allen says, we were in the Warwick Castle in England, and our buddy Ian did not warn us. We were walking through a gate into a World War II period block on the other side of the wall. I was quietly surprised and said, period town. Ian said, yes. We continued chatting and walking. Fascinating.
I've been to Warwick Castle, an investigation in the keep. That was a bit of a con, actually, because we were told we had access to the whole castle. We got there in one section, which was rather annoying. But it was interesting, that, though.
Just kind of going through our
Anthony
comments.
Sabellos. Hello, Anthony.
So, yeah, what's up, buddy? Yeah, that is really cool.
So I think we're all reading these messages. They're flashing by so fast.
Sorry.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
I think this has been a fascinating discussion. I think any one of these books that we've talked about is a podcast in and of itself.
Absolutely.
You know, John Dee was such a fascinating guy, and his work is still mind-blowing to this day. I know I've read things about decapitated heads and using the skulls for divination, and I actually kind of take that idea over there, that model still behind us.
Well, there is rather famously a painting of Dee with the Queen Elizabeth I that's seen around a lot. Funny enough, my publisher used it for the second printing, not edition, second printing of the Book of Ronzon, and an X-ray showed that someone had removed the ring of skulls that were around Dee in front of Queen Elizabeth.
I know that story.
Cleaned off. Yeah, it's strange they did that, but yeah, they were sort of cleaned up, if you like.
I wasn't ready for mass consumption.
No, yes. It's the Victorian age. They were very prudish about anything like that. Everything was all hushed up and kept hidden away, and it was, let's pretend that these things never happened. It was very much the Victorian times that was the problem. Unfortunately, those sort of paintings got altered. But one thing I'd like to just mention, if I may. As I said, I've been a psychotherapist for nearly 20 years now, 18 years. I'm retiring, sort of. I'm giving up the profession. It's one of those jobs that you can do for a length of time, and kind of the best way I can put it, I've lost the passion for it. I've been doing it for quite a long time, and I've been pretty busy. And I've always wanted to get into publishing myself, become a publisher. Oh. So I am launching my own publishing company next year. It's called Ninth Circle Press. I already have a couple of writers on board, but the first book that's coming out is my next book, which is on a thing called the Citra Akra, which is linked to the dark side of the Kabbalah. Now, if you know the Kabbalah, you've heard of that?
Yes.
Of course, yes.
It has another side called the clip-off. Now, the clip-off is like the dark version, but the term Citra Acra has been linked together with the clip-off as being one thing. But the Citra Acra is far, far older. It goes back much further to Jewish mysticism. And again, it's one of those ones because it gets mixed in with the other topic. There's nothing in the realms of occult writing that has been specifically about the Citra Acra itself. And my book is on that, and it's the one I'm working on at the moment. I actually finished it 4 years ago. It's been with another publisher, but there's been various delays, and we've come to an agreement that I'm going to publish it myself. It's amicable, completely amicable, and it's given me a chance to rewrite it. And I'm actually working on it almost as we're speaking. I was working this afternoon. But the Night Circle Press is my big thing. I'm looking forward to launching that fairly soon. Now, I'll be advertised all over the Paranormal UK radio network. Don't worry about that. So people can find it fairly easily. But that's because of my Night Circle Press is my total fascination with Dante and the Inferno, which again, I've written about as well, the occult elements of that. But that's something I really
that's how a lot of people view hell.
Right. I wanted to get into that. That's why now
that is I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over that one. I didn't mean to.
Come back to that now. I've got all the time in the world. You guys will talk away now, definitely.
Hey, we've kept you up this late.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I believe this is early.
Give us a little bit on that. In fact, I will put.
Oh, hello. It's just me. Well, I don't know if I've.
Well, it is and it isn't. We're still here. I'm going to step away for the same reasons that you PM'd us.
Sure.
And let you tell us a little bit about Dante's Inferno, because I think a lot of people are familiar with it. There's the video game about it, of course, other than the classical writings. It's in our pop culture, and it's kind of the way people view hell, like kind of going through the levels of hell. And,
well, certainly Dante's description of hell has become the version of hell that we see today, this multiple leveled. For me personally, the fascination began when I first read it, which would have been, again, 9-10 years old. I was quite precocious in those days. And I read a version of the translation of Dante's Inferno, which actually isn't the best, but it absolutely captivated me. The story basically is Dante is trying to get to his love, and she's been lost somewhere off. Well, whole story, but basically, he's got to try and find his way out of the dark forest, as it's described at the beginning. And in order to get through to heaven, he has to go through this journey through hell. And he's led by Virgil, who was a Greek poet. And they go through the different layers and levels of hell, and they meet various characters, some mythological, some of people Dante actually knew and didn't like very much. So he sticks them in hell. But it was the way it's described, the language, the imagery. Unfortunately, the original, of course, is in Italian. I don't speak Italian, but I've got 20 plus translations of it now, and there's some very, very good ones. Because it's Italian, you sometimes have to sacrifice. You either get the flow of the language translated, which can deviate a little bit from what Dante was actually saying, or a direct translation that loses the rhythm of the poem. Effectively, is a poem. So trying to get the two balanced is not easy, but you can get a real feel of the imagery and the ideas. And so it became the way we view hell now, the way hell is supposed to work, the different levels, the different kind of people who are sent into hell are all described in Dante's Inferno. I just found it absolutely fascinating. Certainly things like going into the city of Dis, we have this basically sign of the gate that says, I forget the exact wording now, it's basically abandon all hope, all you who enter here. It's quite a famous phrase now, but it comes from Dante. It's like, forget it, you've got no hope. This is it, you're already dead. It's like the idea is, can these souls be saved? No, they can't, they're dead. They're already dead, that's it. You're the only living soul that's allowed to pass through here. This is Dante himself going through it. And often these things are trying to get him to capture him, to take his soul away. But he wants to get through to what's called purgatory, and then up to paradise, heaven. But he has to go through the Inferno first. And that's the difficult bit, is the journey through that. But there are lots of allusions towards mystical stuff that's beyond even Dante's ideas. Dante was a Christian, he was a Catholic Christian. So he sees it from that angle, but you can certainly view it more esoterically in terms of what he's experiencing. You can draw out esoteric elements that Dante probably didn't intend to be in the book, in Inferno, but you can find them if you read enough times that I've read. You can start to see the parallels of certain ideas all being connected together. And that's what I found absolutely fascinating as a kid, sort of reading that, the imagery, the ideas that you put in my head were like, strange nightmares, but I loved it, that imagery.
Right.
I just found there was so much in there that you could unravel and work through in terms of almost like how you can be careful. You could follow this dark path if you're not very careful. You could fall off to one side and get caught up in darker stuff that's not harmful in itself, but can lead you in harmful places, ideas that are not particularly good if you're not very careful. And that's what I found fascinating. So the occult current is my examination. The book itself is quite short. It's only like 1,500 words. 15,000 words, I say. It came about because my publisher, Three Hands Press, were affected by COVID like everybody else was, but their printers actually, unfortunately, was in trouble. Three Hands Press before COVID hit. So the printers themselves had a problem. Basically, the California fires, you remember those just before the COVID thing started? They were affected by those quite badly. So the original book was delayed. So they wanted to get something out during the COVID period. And they asked a few of the writers that they liked, basically, if you anything you'd like to write that you could do quite quickly. So I wrote that in about 3 months, which for me is incredibly fast. To get it done and dusted within 3 months was amazing for me. But there's a lot I left out that I want to go back to. So I will be doing a longer second edition of that. And I've kind of got some magical ideas that you can use to perhaps journey into those levels of the Inferno. Again, whether they literally exist is not the question. It's the concepts are there. There's definitely that, again, the psychotherapeutic, the Jungian psychology of the layers make an important thing, because that's what the big difference between Freud and Jung is. For Freud, the unconscious is big, massive yuckiness that was like the drive, the motivator down there. It's like, but for Jung, it was much more going on.
Freud always thought everything was like a repressed thought, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, he had the
means. I don't even play one on TV, but I think the Freud's thing was like it's all this repressed stuff. We don't get to, I don't know, have enough sex or whatever it is. Things with our mothers, whatever our problems are. It's all this kind of repressed energy coming out, and it's what our dreams are about, that sort of thing, which, there might have been like a little bit of truth there, but it wasn't the whole deal. And Jung a much bigger perspective, even being a student of Freud's.
Yeah, so then this is the thing. He had ego and superego, and that was it. All the unconscious stuff was all pushed down, not very nice. But for Jung, there was far more to it than that. And that it adheres against this idea of those layers of reality. They are layers of internal consciousness. Again, the Inferno reflects that as well, and pushing down. And one of the things I always found fascinating is one of the big differences was we have this idea that the lowest hell of Satan is it's all hot and flames and fire. No, for him it's frozen. Hell was a frozen, cold place where Satan was stuck, was trapped in the ice, couldn't move, couldn't escape. And I found that was different as well. That was really interesting, that kind of alternate idea of what hell was like. It's like these souls are trapped in the ice. They can't go anywhere. They're just stuck there. And I found that was really fascinating as well. It gives almost a cold chill. The idea is so different. Yet the other ideas have now informed how we see the idea of hell from the Bible. So it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. So much of it, I think is put in there from the Bible. It's biblical. And it's just almost this idea of you have to hurt yourself in a way, like for your sins. You have to pay for your sins, I guess.
The dark journey, yes. The dark forest.
And you think about that from a psychological standpoint, does it really add up to the same things? Or does it give maybe a system of magic power? If you
the two parallel each other. This whole notion it's in ritual magic when you're working properly, and it's in psychotherapy when you're working properly, is you confronting your demons. Whether you see those demons as being big scary monsters from hell that come up, you ritually induce them to come up from hell, or you see they're coming from within you, you'll do your own. The Choronzon in Enochian is like the scariness of Choronzon. You got to get past your own self-ego. It's overcoming your own ego. And that's why I think Crowley had a big problem. His ego was gigantic. So if his Choronzon was a gigantic monster, just like his own ego was. And I think that's what you're dealing with, this confrontation with the darkness within all of us. The darkness, not even in the sense of evil, but the almost instinctualness, our instincts to survive. It's like we're animals underneath it all. You took us in the right environment, we'll take each other apart for whatever we need. We'll eat each other if we need to. And society, we try to get away from that idea. Like, oh, that's not nice. There's the instincts of there's like Freud with all this repressed stuff. But you have to work through it. And this is the thing often in psychotherapy with a client who have a difficult time. whatever it is you fear the most, whatever you don't want it to be, the cause of your problem, it is because you fear it. That's it. You know it. You kind of know already that's the worst thing. The worst thing I've experienced is the cause of why I feel now. You've got to deal with that. And
one way or another, it's our fault.
Right.
Right. There could be shadow work we need to do.
Shadow, right.
But, or whatever, but it's still kind of like you're responsible for it.
And not necessarily, no.
No, you don't.
It depends on what I know from my work is it's not the experiences that you have, it's how you deal with them that has the effect. But some things are so enormous you can't deal with them. There's no way of dealing with them. You know, it's you. An example, I'm going to get done dark alleyways. If we talk about someone's been abused as a child, you know, it's not the child's fault they were abused. The abuser's the problem. But how you internalize blame as if it's your fault is the problem. It's like that's what makes you hate yourself, repress your own feelings, and see yourself as being of a lesser person or less value, less meaning because of what you experienced. It's not your fault you've experienced these things. It's just nothing about you. You've experienced them, but you have to deal with that realization that when you start to see yourself differently as more positive in a better way, your sense of yourself changes. And sometimes that's really difficult to deal with. If you had an experience, you think you know this is who you are because of the experiences you have, and you start to challenge that, your most basic sense of self being challenged, it can be frightening because you suddenly all that you know about yourself changes. And that can scare the hell out of people. So sometimes people do retreat back into their trauma because they can't deal with the idea of being that different person.
Yes.
So, but yeah, these are all ways of dealing with those kind of experiences.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And to compare it to Dante's Inferno and going through the layers or levels of hell is certainly one way of dealing with oneself.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Dante was also talking about, that more. He saw the society around him at the time in France and Italy was becoming quite corrupt. And a lot of some of the people that he sort of put in hell were people that were politicians because he'd fallen out with the leadership in France. Because Italy at that point wasn't one country. It was lots of little kingdoms loosely associated with each other. And he'd fallen out of favour. And he got his own back in a few. We're sticking them in hell. And sort of an argue with them in hell saying, you're down there, you're staying there.
Can we do that today?
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
We all have a panel where we, maybe offline though, not live, where we get together. I was just telling Reginald Randall this earlier, and we just really need to do this ourselves and just, collective consciousness. And there you go. Put them all in hell.
Some group therapy.
Yes.
Yeah. He did say he was trying to retire, so I don't think we should be.
Yes, I'm not. Yeah.
I'm kidding, though. I just thought it was kind of funny.
It is.
Somebody else said that.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy what I do as a job, but it's one of those things that I used to be a school teacher for a brief period of time. I enjoyed teaching, but all the other crap that goes with it, all the meetings, the planning, all that nonsense, just I couldn't deal with that anymore. And the work itself, I really enjoy helping people, but when it's not a challenge, it's important because when you realize yourself the work is not a challenge to you anymore, that it's not motivating you, then you're not going to be your best for your clients. That's the thing, you have to be careful. And I've talked to other psychotherapists. Most of us do this job for about 20 years at most. I went into it after other professions. It's my sort of
There's a certain burnout factor from hearing other
to
people.
Avoid that. As I say, as long as you feel you're looking forward, I don't even look forward to it. I do. I quite enjoy working with people I work with, but the dynamism, something's gone. I know something's gone. It's gone out of what I'm doing. I know this is the point to finally bring to life the publishing plan I've had for years. I keep talking about it. Part of the reason
Sure.
See, part of the reason I stopped doing the therapy work is to force myself into doing it. That's the thing. When I qualified as a psychotherapist, it's like, well, I've got a job. I don't like it very much, but I've been doing this while I've been training. I need to stop doing the job to make myself succeed in this. So if I try and do a middle class of part-time therapy, part-time working, it never works. You have to throw yourself into it to make it work. And again, okay, I've got a few thousand saved up, so I've got money to survive on for a while, but I'm stopping what I've been doing to start this new. So you're the first. Say again?
Your new journey.
Yes, exactly. My own little Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
Well, I'm emerging from the Inferno now. I'm going into the purgatory part, which is not as bad as the Inferno.
Wish you good fortune on that journey.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
What were you going to say? We're the first to hear about this?
Yes, I haven't talked about this public on air. This is the first time. It all launches in December. So you're the first. Even my own show I mentioned on there yet.
Put it around the last minute to spread that word.
Yeah, right. Wait, what's the word again?
Thank you.
Bird. Yes, thank you.
But it's one of the funny things. It's predicated on the fact that we're moving. You see, I live in a very large town close to London. We're moving to a much smaller town in the West Country, as it's called, and once that move takes place, then I start the publishing business. So at the moment, I'm kind of been treading water for the early part of 23 as put all the plans together.
Very cool.
That's
very
wonderful.
Cool. And the name of the publishing business is going to be
Ninth Circle Press.
Ninth Circle.
Yes, it's the influence again.
And Circles of Hell.
Yeah,
that is really cool. I love that.
We both do.
So it's a cult, but it's more kind of intellectual occult, should we say, rather than sort of black magic stuff. You know, not probably black magic stuff. It's not the kind of thing I'm going to be doing. It's that kind of part scholastic work, part ritual practice. You know, the idea, the way my books work, it's that kind of middle ground between. You get a lot of purely academic stuff that covers the occult, and it's very interesting, but it can be quite dull to read. And then you get the kind of down and dirty ritual magic stuff, which I'm kind of in the middle between the two. The writers are on board with me. Both what they're talking about has solid background. It's not like stuff they've invented themselves. It's historic, but it's also their own interpretation of that work. So I got 3 people signed up already. So it's next year's plan, next 4 titles next year. So
that's wonderful.
That's fantastic. And I love that. And it's good to mention that if you get into this sorcery stuff and into these books, if you know, say you're an enthusiast in the paranormal and you want to like learn about these areas, you will see that, you know, some of the stuff that's more modern is kind of more TikTok generational, simplified, you know, for lack of a better term, dumbed down, compared to the high magic rituals of, you know, ritual magic in the past that were so complex nobody could follow it. You know, you have to dedicate your life. So maybe there is a happy middle ground between those things that still, you know, keeps the brain ticking at the same time as keeps the magic working. It's not to say either of them are better or worse. If it works for you, then I think that's great, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. But even Crowley talked about trying to meet your high guardian spirit or your higher self.
Higher self.
Yeah. You know, I forget this verbiage you used, but it was basically reaching this state of your best self, right? Living your best life in a way.
Right.
Holy Guardian Angel, as it's
Holy Guardian Angel.
Thank you.
But that's the Quran's thing. It's that kind of connection, that your personal connection. I mean, you don't have to follow the Abramelin ritual, which is about doing that. In my book, the Quran's book, it mentions how you might either deliberately try and connect with it, or they tend to turn up. When you work with magic, these beings, you start to build a real connection with something that kind of crops up by itself. You realize it is the modern version of like the Holy Guardian Angel. He's there, he's with you. It's, as I say, this tall, dark figure that people see around me occasionally. That's that thing, you know, it definitely is. That's the Holy Guardian Angel that popped up for me when my years of working with Golden Dawn stuff originally was my first sort of path, and I found a lot of the original grimoires was now readily available. Back in the 1980s, were virtually possibly hold. I managed to buy one, the Grimoire Vero, which I bought from a shop in London, which is like, oh my god, this is the Holy Grail I've got now. This particular book, it's okay, nothing special about it, but that's the thing now. These days, it's much easier to get hold of these titles. There are quite a few smaller publishing houses have popped up, which is great. You know, they do have a limited print, and you get some people who collect these things and then start selling for thousands of pounds a ton, which is ridiculous. But that's how this business tends to work, unfortunately.
It's crazy. But then
it
sometimes you say, oh my God, why would somebody pay $200 for that book? And then 6 months later, it's on eBay for $600.
I was just going to say, we have one back here.
That beats Dogecoin,
yeah.
You know?
What's that you got? What is it you got?
What is it? Signs and Symbols. We wanted a hardcover. It was like $230.
Oh yeah, we don't have the rare one.
But it
we've got a couple of grimoires back here, actually.
Oh, we do. Yes,
there's a few.
A lot of stuff.
I mean, a lot of these books as well, because they're art. I mean, the limited edition stuff, they're leather bound. You don't see that stuff very much anymore. So they're art objects in themselves. And I think for people, because they have real, genuine magical power in them, if you like, that's how some people see them, that they become fetishized in that respect as well. They become really kind of important to them, which is fine, you know. Stuff, as I say, this stuff, how, I don't know, but it works. Stuff definitely works. It happens.
If you stumbled across it in a yard sale, 30 years from now, do we still have yards? It would be the coolest thing to find this leather-bound edition.
Well,
book of magic that had something in it that the Amazon edition didn't, whatever, it would be the coolest thing in the world.
It must be pre-internet days. I used to imagine if I had some little crusty second-hand bookshop somewhere tucked away, if I had all these amazing volumes in them. I never did. A friend of mine did, I have to say. He was very fortunate. He came across this again 20-odd years ago, a book called The Discovery of Witchcraft by Reginald Scott. It was published originally in the 1540s, and then there was a third edition later on that had a lot of new material in it that was basically this proper magical material that was someone else added into it. Reginald Scott's book was trying to disprove witchcraft and say it was nonsense. And this additional material with lots of examples of the so-called nonsense, but it was actual preserved proper material. Now, the version that's available in the 1500s, a lot of them were burnt, actually, because it was seen as being blasphemous. There was a reprint in 1886, very limited, 250 copies, that goes for stupid money, thousands. Now, today, this is about 20 years ago, he picked up a copy in a bookshop for about, I think it was about £100. It was like, that's a lot of money then, but it was worth a hell of a lot more than that. So he did manage to do what I always dreamt of doing, was to find them. He's found a few books over. He's a book dealer, so he knows what he's looking for. But he occasionally,
absolutely.
I remember being like, I don't know, maybe 5th or 6th grade, and I had a copy of King of Witches by Alex Sanders, like an original copy, hardbound, and had inserts, and there were like naked people in kind of the magic that you mentioned earlier, the Wicca, And I'm sure that book is worth quite a bit now. I wish I still had it. I had quite a few books in the youth, just being fascinated with witchcraft. And
I was given the first edition of Gardner's Mini of Witchcraft, which is worth a lot, given for nothing. Quite nice. And it was a Peter Underwood copy. Peter Underwood, the ghost guy? It was his copy that Joe Gardner gave to him. And this guy gave it to me. He was like, oh, thanks. Very nice indeed.
Yeah, that'd be a treasure.
Well, I helped because there was actually a lot of these of Peter Underwood's own books, which I kicked into a book dealer friend of mine. He got quite a lot of money for those, and said, "Yeah, you take me like you bought those. Yeah, I haven't bought one." So I'm like, "Yes, please," because that's a good work now. Yeah, the first edition of that. I am a bit of a book collector. I'll see if I can just turn that around a little bit to see that's some of my occult books over there, my collection. There's
you got a lot of books.
There's a few thousand quid's worth there.
Sure, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you want to be a publisher? You got to read some books, right?
My therapy books over that side.
That would seem to be the case. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. There's a couple more questions out there if you want to.
Yeah, fire away with questions you've got. I'm sitting just too far back to read them myself in my glasses, unfortunately.
Okay.
Is there a tradition that Andy follows?
That's a good question.
A number. That's the funny thing with how I work. I'm quite what you call eclectic. I do tend to vary from topic to topic. Yes. I find different stuff work in different ways. I don't do an awful lot these days. I tend to do with the scrying stuff, the experimental stuff. As I say, I've developed a way of using the ceremonial, the grimoire magic, which you're supposed to use the sigil to summon the demon, etc. I use the sigil to go to where they are. So this scrying journey, which is plugging a book, I know, but it's one I'm working on at the moment, which will be out probably 2 years' time. I expect by the time I get it done. How I've developed that method. And I use that method with a lot of the stuff to explore. If I'm trying to do anything more practical, I tend to use, my camera's a bit wobbly there. I tend to use something called Icelandic stave magic, which
I know
it's obviously. So it's quite simple stuff, straightforward. I did a little bit. I occasionally do stuff for other people as well. I had a friend of mine. She was having a bit of a difficult time with an ex-partner who was bugging her and annoying her, and I put this thing together to put in the ground by the front door, and he never came back. Never. Coincidence maybe. But she also had a bit of bad vibe energy in the house as well. And he dealt with both of those. She said, yeah, it worked. Got rid of it pretty fast. So the stave magic, I use that for practical stuff more than anything else, for other people, for stuff like that. It definitely works. Again, it's intention. It's you're working, you create the sigil image on the piece of particular material, because it's various things, leather, paper, whatever. The instructions are part of what you do with it. And I found that very effective. So practical stuff, I tend to use that. When it comes to other systems, I tend to do a lot, say, the scrying stuff. I work with there's a chap called Andrew Chumley who wrote a book called The Azoe Show, which is traditional witchcraft, culture sabotage stuff, which Freelands Press published some of their stuff. And I've developed system working with his material. Again, it's scrying based. It's a little different to what he planned it to be used for. But again, I find it works well for me. It's journeying to other realities is like the way I find it's working, or journeying deep within the collective unconscious.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a sort of medium to get there, to get that contact. I like that.
We both do.
I know with the stave magic,
yes.
For those that aren't in that loop, it's basically we're talking about sigils.
Yes.
The work, and as you mentioned, using different medium properties like leather or things they would have had at the time. Going back historically.
Well, that was the funny thing. The reason the wiki shall decay is because of these Icelandic versions that got published by the Icelandic Museum. Actually, they published them, and these were the Black Books. It was the Black Book of Everum, which came from Sweden. Again, was a collection of spells that a woman found in the loft. Basically, it was a great grandparent, something like that. And they say there's mentioned these. The Red Book of Appin was another one. There's another one with the Devil's. Oh, Devil's something. I think it's called off the top of my head now. But these are books that were known to have existed with English magic spells in, but have been lost to time. So that was the idea of trying to recreate them. And I've got the Witchcraft stuff from my own book, but I like the staves. I like the symbols, the drawing them. A lot of them are based on the Goetic magic from the ceremonial magic from the Middle Ages in the UK, in Europe. It's where they transferred across. They've mixed kind of runic stuff with ceremonial magic or the ritual stuff, put it together to create these staves, and they're excellent.
That's wonderful.
Excellent.
I love the crossing of that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting because there is a definite crossover. Some of them, the staves, look very similar to the Goetic sigils. It's like there's clearly a connection. And again, there's a Christianized. They've taken a lot of sort of older Icelandic material and Christianized it to some degree. Some of the spells, such as Jesus Christ, etc., etc. But again, I don't have a problem with that because you're dealing with a history of people following those paths. If you're lots and lots of people are praying to Jesus, you're generating Jesus in a sense. You're actually empowering the idea, the toll of Jesus, if you like, becoming real. So you're tapping into that energy flow. The idea of these things not necessarily existing literally, but you're tapping into the energy that's already in place.
That's why maybe these things have power.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree, definitely.
Just thought about. We think that that our thoughts carry a certain weight. And if you think about something long enough, it kind of gets closer to you. And This is how we feel that a haunting can occur because it happened to us. An idea of obsession, and we're trying to answer these kind of rabbit hole questions and thinking about a particular entity or a thing that we had come across like so much. It became a haunting. So we didn't have to go anywhere anymore.
Yeah.
And that was hard to get rid of. The real way to banish that was to stop thinking about it.
Well, I've seen in our house here that there are odd things that occur in this house. Now, this building was built in the 1990s. There was nothing here before, because I grew up in this town, so I know the area. But if I moved from this town to London, where I live now wasn't here. It was just fields. Came back, moved here. So it was all about living in a new town, even though I knew the town perfectly. But there's nothing been here before. But we have weird stuff happen. Things do vanish in this house and reappear in other places where they shouldn't be.
Oh, airport.
Yeah. And I put it down to what I do here, the magic work I do. It leaks. You open things up, you close them down, but energy leaks, and you get things move around. It really is ridiculous. I mean, simple example, in our kitchen, looks onto a small garden. We had a problem a while ago with a neighbourhood's cat used to poo on our lawn, basically. A bit smelly, you have to deal with it. So I had a little water pistol. I'd just shoot him through the window if he was on the lawn. It was strong, it wasn't powerful.
Like water gun?
I'm sorry.
In the US.
Little pistol, small one. So it was just
I thought you said pickle.
Pickle, yes.
Oh, pistol. Little gun. It wasn't particularly strong. It just shot a bit of water and the cat would run away. It was great. It was by the sink. Other side of our kitchen, there's a cupboard which got the boiler in and it's closed in. And above that is a shelf quite high up. We've got some glass vases for plants, for flowers. The water pistol had vanished. It disappeared. Don't know where it was. It was only when my wife went to get a vase down from that shelf high up, there was a water pistol. No idea it got there. We've no kids. It's just my wife, myself, and guinea pigs and live in a cage. No idea it got up there. It was there. It was up on that shelf. No idea it got there. Very strange.
Of course it was.
Yeah, we understand.
And then we often could sit in our lounge in the evening, and it's funny enough, it's not happened much recently, but clicks and bangs in the kitchen. Got a lot of them. It's not far away from the room, but the odd knock and noise. Nothing in there. Go and look, nothing's moved, nothing's dropped off, but these odd clicks and bangs quite commonly. Occasionally, therapy work in here. There was one guy in particular years ago. He had a lot of trouble he was dealing with, but every time he got upset, my ceiling would crack. Every time, not once or twice, but every time, in the ceiling. Now, there's no way up in that ceiling. It was a garage, basically. It's a converted garage to an office, so it sticks out the front of the house. There's nothing above me apart from a bit of loft, and there's no access up there, and yet the ceiling would crack every time. It was very strange.
That's very creepy.
Well, it's like energy blasting out. The guy was every time he was really upset, so it was like the energy manifesting was causing the cracks. And funny enough, Jung used to talk about that. It was a client he had. It would always happen hours afterwards, and he'd sit at a dinner table, and there'd be a crack in the table. 2 minutes later, there'd be another crack. On one occasion, he had Freud over for dinner, and there was a crack, and the light flickered, and he said, 2 minutes, there'll be another one. And there was. And that client had been that day. And so it's in his records, wrote about it. So, yeah.
Wow.
It's the energy, the vibe energy bursting out of the person, causing vibrations to occur.
One of the things we talk about is like, where does that energy go and where does it end? Does it end? Can it manifest other similar energies? This
it's dissipation.
I think there's some validity to that. Like, if you're putting out enough negative energy, it'll attract other energies that are also negative.
I think you get dissipation. The energy it eventually kind of peters out and spreads out so far it no longer has any effect. It's still there, but that moment of explosion of energy. Funny enough, almost giving us full circle, talking about Robert Monroe at the beginning, about the hemisphere material. When I first started experimenting with that, before I lived here in the flat I was living in London, I had some small Egyptian statues. And I remember one occasion, having sat in my chair, eyes closed, for half an hour listening to this, the statue had turned, was looking towards me. And it wasn't before, definitely wasn't. It maybe a few degrees, but I hadn't moved. I was in the chair the whole time. There's no one else around. It turned and was facing me. It's like, ooh. I was after listening to the hemisync.
Yeah.
It's too far from me now.
We were talking about hemisync before. That's okay. We're going to wrap this up because we've been on for a long time. But we love the hemisync stuff, and I know you're a fan of it as well. We were talking before the show. Binaural beats, anything. What do you, real quick, what are your thoughts on trance states and making an imprint in the collective consciousness?
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, when you talk about trance, there's different kinds of trance. I mean, obviously, when I work with hypnosis, it gets called trance sometimes. Of course, people go into that deeper connection with themselves. They're no longer in the here and now. They're exploring their own subconscious processes. But, I've seen, to some degree, experienced that kind of trance experience on locations. I used to be able, I don't do it now, I used to be able to tune into a place and get a sense of the vibe of the place, the atmosphere, the energy, and to the point of sometimes being able to describe what I was seeing around me. This is when I worked with those companies. That's one of the things I used to do, was I describe what I was seeing, how the place used to look. And quite often I was told afterwards, you're quite accurate there. It does look like that. And sometimes you get a sense of, it's like you got caught up in the place. And I started, it sounds like channeling, but it's not. It was like I was aware of conversations being said, and I was repeating back I was hearing being said in my head. And sometimes people said your face sort of changed a bit when you were doing that. And again, just to finish on really, that I was recorded on one occasion by a guy who was a sound specialist, and he said your voice frequency changed. Now that's not supposed to be humanly possible without surgery to your throat. He said, but look at the waveforms. Your voice, you'd hear it was different, but the frequency changed. No one's making that, but there you go. He said he's only ever known one other person to ever be able to do that. And they said she seemed to do it at will, but you just did it. And so I was just literally repeating what I was hearing being said around me. It was a two-way conversation. I was repeating both halves, and my voice was changing for the other half of the conversation.
Wow. Yeah, that's like we're getting into possession.
Yeah.
I was aware. See, that's the funny thing. People talk about being trance. I don't know what's happening. Remember, it's all weird in his voice. I was aware the whole time. I knew exactly what was doing on, what I was saying. I was caught up with it, but I could snap out of it any moment. I was always aware of where I was and what I was doing. And I think that's the magical training that does that. When you work with this stuff magically as well, that gears you up a little bit more.
Hypnosis does that as well.
There's a connection, certainly. I mean, it's what I work with a lot.
Anytime you're not really under like you think, you just relax. It's
a dual state. That's what I know. You can't say the same thing. They know they're very much in their experience and they're recalling, because they use it to access early life memories, experiences, the trauma of those experiences. They know where they are, in my office, but they're also in the moment. There's like a dual space you're occupying at the same time. So I've experienced it because I went through what's called training analysis, and it involved hypnosis work as well, where again, it's completely open. There's no suggestion of where you're supposed to go in time or anything. You literally, what are you seeing? What's going through to you? Because the trauma stuff rises to the surface by itself. You give it enough time on its own. I mean, straightforward psychotherapy, that's how that works, is you free associate and talk about stuff. The problems come to the surface by themselves, because ultimately your brain's trying to solve them anyway, so it comes up. But hypnosis speeds that process up. When it's used in analysis, it speeds it all up. I've been asked, do I do past life regression, that kind of stuff? I don't. Not that I don't have a problem with it. It's just I work more clinically, shall we say. I'm more interested in this life experiences for a therapeutic route rather than anything for past lives.
In a way, it's like a path to the same thing, and it's going to come out either way if you just
ultimately,
plant enough seeds, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing you're always very careful with therapeutically is we use what's called clean language. You avoid anything that suggests any route or path you expect them to go down. Because people will sit in the chair and they say, well, I was thinking about this experience when I was younger, this today. Do that's what's going to come up? I don't know. We'll see. Whatever comes up. And often, this will be different to what they're thinking about. It's there because it's their experience, but it comes up differently. And that's often the most effective way of dealing with it when it comes out of the blue almost. Like, well, suddenly I remember that day when I was 6 and what was happening. Suddenly it comes up.
Yeah, it's more genuine by coming out that way.
It's all repressed trauma. It's usually the not being able to cry or whatever, not being able to get the trauma out, not being able to express what you're feeling. That stays in us. If you don't let it out, then that's what often causes things like anxiety disorders or depression. They're caused by that trauma that's held inside. You haven't been able to express it for whatever reason. And usually the therapeutic, you release the trauma, you let it out. And that changes dramatically how you see yourself and the world around you.
It makes fantastic sense. Yes.
I think that's a great note to leave the show on. I love that. I think we all need therapy. I'm ready to sign up immediately.
Well, a little quick thing, there's a common saying we have about 90% of the population could benefit from some form of therapy or counseling, but only 9% ever seek it. And it's a shame.
Oh, that's terrible.
That is a terrible number.
Good Lord. I didn't know that.
I think
statistic.
It's, more accepted today than it was, like a lot of things, 20, 30 years ago, where you might have been ashamed to be saying, oh, I'm seeing a therapist.
Right.
Like, what are you, crazy?
One thing I'll say is a lot more men come for therapy now than used to. A lot more men come, which is really good. But predominantly used to be women, but now a lot of men come, which is good. It helps, definitely.
That's great. That's great. And where's the best place that people can find you? I know I've got a few different websites in our ticker, but as you know, this will be a Paranormal UK Radio Network production and podcast out there.
Easy place to find me is Facebook, actually. If you look for Andy Mercer 100, that'd be me. And you'll see a picture of somebody reading a book on Carl Jung, funny enough. On Facebook, that's the easy place to find me. I sort of haunt that most of the time. I'm sort of between clients more often now. A lot of people I talk to, because interest in the occult is not a vast, huge subject. So most people I know are from around the world. Most of them are in America, actually, and talk a lot on Facebook because it's easier. So yeah, this is the best place to usually find me is just on Facebook. Look for the guy reading the Carl Jung book, and you found me.
Excellent. Well, this has been a wonderful show and a wonderful interview. I've loved our chat and our talk. Our audience absolutely thinks you're the cat's ass, as we say in America. I don't know if we say that expression in the UK, but cat's ass is a good thing here.
Yes. Cat's whiskers is like an old-fashioned phrase that was similar.
Well, we'll use that
that's a little gentler, isn't it? Yeah. More gentle. Yeah. That one's got a little lube on it. Cat's whiskers. I like that.
Little lube. Oh, my God.
Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it. It's really fun.
Thank you.
And we have to do this again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know where to find me.
Excellent. I sure do. I'd like to thank everybody that joined us tonight in our chats and our audience, and we hope you appreciate our podcast, and we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.